Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Rain had a way of washing the city's sins down the gutters, and tonight it seemed intent on scrubbing every last regret from the pavements of Mercer's memories. Detective James Mercer pulled his collar up against the chill, stepping out into a street lamp's pallid glow. Every puddle on the cracked sidewalk was a mirror of the night sky, distorted, transient, and full of secrets. Mercer's footsteps echoed along empty alleys and beneath the low hum of neon signs, each step measured as if on a tightrope between past and present. His mind, a tangled archive of old cases and personal missteps, kept pace with a steady gait. The city, cloaked in perpetual drizzle, whispered its own sorrowful narrative, a dirge for lost time and lost souls. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight, the rain was more than mere weather. It was a prelude, a quiet herald of things to come. As he walked, Mercer's thoughts wandered to his cluttered apartment, a cramped space where the shadows in the corners often shifted, and where every creak of the floorboard carried echoes of guilt too heavy to bear. He recalled nights spent alone, the weight of his past a constant companion in the dark. The city had a way of revealing itself to those who listened. Mercer slowed as he reached a narrow side street, its pavement slick with rain. Here, the familiar hum of distant traffic was replaced by the soft, rhythmic drumming of raindrops on metal and stone. He paused by a grimy storefront window, and for a brief moment, the reflection he saw wasn't quite his own. In the warped glass, a dark silhouette lingered at the periphery, a shape that might have been a trick of the light or something else entirely. Mercer blinked, and the figure was gone, swallowed by the rain. Yet the chill that raced along his spine told him it had been more than a mere illusion. He continued, each step laced with a cautious awareness. The night's silence was punctuated by the distant sound of a siren, a reminder of the city's ever-present undercurrent of distress. Mercer's thoughts turned inward, revisiting memories that he preferred to keep locked away. There was a time when he believed in justice, in the possibility of redemption through duty. But those days were lost now, buried under layers of unspoken remorse and the endless routine of a job that never allowed him a moment's peace. As he neared his destination, a modest apartment block that stood defiant against the weather, Mercer paused before the heavy metal door. He hesitated, as if expecting the gloom itself to reach out and follow him inside. The building was as weathered as he felt, its once bright paint now faded and peeling, much like the optimism Mercer had long since abandoned. Inside his apartment, the darkness was both literal and metaphorical. The single lamp cast a feeble pool of light against the encroaching shadows, creating shapes that danced and merged with every subtle shift of the night. The room bore the marks of a man who had long stopped, fighting the demons in his head. Scattered case files, half-drunk cups of cold coffee, and a small stack of personal mementos lay in quiet disarray on a battered desk. Mercer set his soaked coat on a chair and lingered by the window. Outside, the rain persisted, its cadence a constant reminder that nothing in life was permanent, even the darkness. His eyes caught the reflection of a broken mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. In its fractured surface, he saw multiple images of himself, each one tinged with regret and weariness. For a moment, the reflection seemed to whisper of a past that had never truly let go, a series of choices that had led him to this solitary vigil in a city that felt as haunted as he did. He moved to his desk and sat down slowly, almost ritualistically, as if the very act could exorcise the lingering shadows. Mercer opened a weathered notebook, its pages filled with observations, thoughts, and the kind of confessions one reserves for the solitude of the night. As he began to write, the scratch of his pen on paper was a deliberate, measured sound, a counterpoint to the unpredictable patter of rain outside. Each line he wrote was heavy with unspoken sorrow, a catharsis of memories too raw for the daylight. There were references to a case long closed, a case that had cost him more than he was willing to admit. There were vague allusions to rituals he had once dismissed as the ramblings of the desperate, but which now haunted him with their unyielding persistence. With every word, Mercer felt the past pressing in, the weight of unresolved guilt mingling with the present. Yet, even in the quiet solitude of his apartment, Mercer could not escape the sensation of being watched. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to ripple with a life of their own, and the soft hum of the city outside carried whispers that defied explanation. There was a part of him that wondered if these were merely the specters of his own mind, or if something more sinister lurked just beyond the veil of ordinary sight. He paused his writing, lifting his eyes to the window where the rain blurred the boundary between the world inside and the world outside. In that watery reflection, he saw not only the darkened street, but also the faint outline of a figure lingering just beyond the lamplight, a presence that might have been nothing at all, or might have been a harbinger of the troubles yet to come. A shiver ran through him, a visceral reaction that spoke of deep-seated fears he had long tried to bury. In the quiet moments that followed, Mercer allowed himself to be consumed by the atmosphere of the night. Every sound, every flicker of light was a reminder that even in routine, the extraordinary could seep through the cracks. The steady beat of the rain, the soft murmur of the wind, and the subtle, almost imperceptible shift of shadows around him, all of it conspired to forge a sense of unease that he couldn't quite shake. With a resigned sigh, Mercer set the pen aside. The routine of his nightly reflections was both a comfort and a curse, each stroke of the pen a reminder of the past that clung to him like a second skin. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a moment as he allowed the ambient sounds of the night to wash over him. There was no immediate case to pursue, no urgent call to action. Tonight was a night for reflection, for feeling the pulse of the city and the slow, relentless throb of his own conscience. As the hours stretched on, Mercer's thoughts drifted between the mundane and the mysterious. The steady rainfall, the tired lamplight, the faint murmur of memories, all combined to create a tapestry of loneliness and quiet dread. He wondered if the darkness outside was a mirror of the darkness within, if every shadow that passed by his window was a silent witness to the sins of the past. And in that reflective solitude, as the city slumbered under the relentless drizzle, Mercer could not help but feel that something was stirring in the depths of the night, a subtle promise of a disturbance that would soon shatter the delicate balance of his carefully constructed routine. For now, however, the darkness remained a silent companion, a watchful presence that made no demands but whispered incessantly of things unseen, and of a fate inexorably intertwined with the shadows. Outside, the rain fell on, persistent and unyielding, as if determined to reveal the truth hidden beneath the surface of the city. Inside, Mercer sat with his thoughts, alone with his memories, unaware that the night had already begun to write a new chapter in the story of his haunted existence. Mercer's restless night was interrupted at dawn by the insistent ring of his telephone, a sound that, even through the haze of early morning, set his pulse racing. With a groggy reluctance, he answered, the voice on the other end clipped with urgency. "Detective Mercer, we've got a situation on Elmwood Avenue. You need to get down here now." The words were brief, but they carried a weight that was all too familiar. Mercer's heart sank as he recalled that unsettling feeling from the night before, a whisper of dread now manifesting in the form of a new case. He dressed quickly, his movements mechanical as he prepared to face another chapter of the darkness that haunted both the city and his own memories. The drive to Elmwood Avenue was shrouded in a mist that blurred the edges of reality. Rain had softened into a steady drizzle, the persistent patter against the windshield echoing like distant, rhythmic chants. Mercer's mind was a jumble of half-remembered nightmares and a gnawing sense that tonight's call was more than routine. It was a harbinger of something long overdue. Arriving at the scene, Mercer was met by a cluster of uniformed officers gathered near a narrow, dilapidated alley. The building that framed the scene was a relic from another time, a once grand structure now marked by peeling paint and a history of neglect. Its weathered facade seemed to harbor secrets of its own. Stepping under the yellow tape, Mercer's trained eyes began to survey the scene with methodical precision. The alley was bathed in the pallid glow of a single street lamp, its light casting long, sinister shadows across cracked pavement and scattered debris. In the center of the area lay a body, a solitary figure sprawled in a manner that spoke of both violence and ritual. The victim was draped in a dark, stained coat, their features obscured by the low angle of the light and the pooling water around them. Mercer's gaze was immediately drawn to the ground near the body. Strange symbols were etched into the concrete, their shapes archaic and deliberate. The markings glimmered faintly, as if wet with the remnants of the night's rain or something less earthly. "Detective Mercer," said a uniformed officer approaching, "the scene is unsettling. We haven't seen anything like this in years." Mercer knelt beside the body, his gloved hand hovering near one of the etched symbols without quite touching it. Each line and curve seemed to pulse with a quiet intensity, as if the very act of inscription had been a ritual, a sacrifice performed in the dead of night. The meticulous placement of the symbol spoke of purpose and a knowledge of occult practices that Mercer had once dismissed as the ramblings of the desperate. Now, however, those dismissed whispers threatened to materialize before him. He slowly scanned the immediate vicinity, the uneven pavement, the subtle scattering of personal effects, and the lingering dampness that clung to every surface. The scene was silent except for the persistent drip of rainwater from a rusted fire escape overhead. Yet in that silence, Mercer sensed echoes, a resonance of a long-forgotten incantation that stirred memories he had tried so hard to bury. Standing up, Mercer called over to one of the officers. "Have you secured any evidence? Anything that might explain these symbols?" The officer's reply was hesitant. "We're still collecting what we can. For now, it appears that the victim had no obvious ties to any gang activity or common street crime. But these marks, they're not something you see every day." Mercer nodded slowly, his mind already retracing the contours of similar markings he'd encountered in old case files, files that now seemed disturbingly relevant. His gaze drifted upward to the building's facade. There was a deliberate quality in the decay. The broken windows, the graffiti that overlaid parts of the wall, and the way the structure itself seemed to sag under the weight of years of neglect. It was as if the building was a living testament to the inevitability of decay, a mirror to the fading vestiges of hope that Mercer clung to. A chill swept over him as he considered the possibility that the victim's death was not an isolated incident, but rather the latest manifestation of a pattern that spanned decades. His thoughts returned to the echoes of the night before, the mysterious figure in the rain, the fractured reflection in his apartment mirror, and he felt that these disparate threads were slowly weaving together a tapestry of horror. "Detective, you might want to take a closer look at that symbol," another officer remarked, pointing toward a more detailed carving on a nearby wall. Mercer stepped over, his eyes narrowing as he examined the carving. This symbol was more intricate than the others, a circular design interlaced with arcane sigils that seemed to dance in the interplay of light and shadow. It was as if the symbol was imbued with an energy that defied the natural order, a force that beckoned from beyond the veil of the ordinary. His pulse quickened, and a memory he had long suppressed stirred in the recesses of his mind. He recalled reading about similar symbols in the margins of an old occult manuscript during his early days on the force, a time when he had been less jaded and more open to the mysteries of the world. Now, with the cold evidence of this new crime scene before him, that old knowledge felt both like a distant echo and an immediate warning. Mercer moved to document the scene meticulously, his pen moving deliberately over his notebook as he recorded every detail. The positioning of the body, the weathered condition of the surroundings, and the precise nature of each symbol. His handwriting, usually steady and measured, betrayed a hint of urgency, a silent admission that he felt the weight of something profound and inexplicable pressing in upon him. Amidst the clinical routine of evidence gathering, Mercer's senses were continuously assailed by small, inexplicable occurrences. A sudden gust of wind rustled through the narrow alley, scattering loose scraps of paper and sending a shiver down his spine. In the distance, a dog howled, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the anguish of the city itself. And yet, beneath these mundane disturbances lay a subtler, more disconcerting rhythm, the unmistakable pulse of something otherworldly. Back inside the precinct, the air was thick with subdued tension. Mercer spent hours poring over the evidence with a small team of officers and forensic experts. The investigation was slow, every detail examined under the harsh scrutiny of bright fluorescent lights, yet the mysteries of the symbols and the motive behind the killing refused to yield easily. Colleagues exchanged wary glances as Mercer recounted his own impressions of the scene, a narrative that was as much about the eerie atmosphere as it was about the tangible evidence. He found himself returning again and again to that circular, intricate symbol, unable to shake its hold on his thoughts. It was as if the symbol were a cipher, encoded with layers of meaning that bridged the gap between the physical and the metaphysical. In a quiet moment, he recalled an old case, one that had haunted him for years, where a similar symbol had appeared in the margins of a cryptic journal, hinting at rituals that blurred the line between life and death. The day wore on, and as the rain tapered off into a persistent drizzle, Mercer's mind was a maelstrom of recollections and forebodings. In a brief conversation with one of the forensic analysts, he learned that traces of an unusual, almost otherworldly residue were present near the symbols, substances that defied easy classification. The analyst's tone was measured, but his eyes revealed a hint of unease. It's not something we encounter on a regular basis, Detective. I'd recommend we consider the possibility that this isn't purely a criminal act. That suggestion lingered in Mercer's thoughts as he retreated to his temporary office, a cramped room at the back of the precinct where the hum of computers and the murmur of voices provided a backdrop to his solitary reflections. Here, he spread out photographs of the crime scene and his handwritten notes, piecing together a puzzle that seemed designed to challenge the very nature of reality. In the quiet of his office, Mercer's inner monologue grew louder. Was this murder the work of a deranged killer inspired by occult rituals? Or was it the latest act in a much larger, more insidious plan? A plan that might have its roots in the darkest corners of his own past? The thought was as unsettling as it was inevitable. His life, with all its failures and regrets, had always been intertwined with mysteries that defied simple explanation. And now, those mysteries were closing in around him like a noose. As the precinct's clock ticked steadily towards the late afternoon, Mercer found himself lost in contemplation. The intricate symbol on Elmwood Avenue was not merely a clue. It was a summons, a quiet command that beckoned him deeper into a labyrinth of secrets. Every unanswered question, every faint memory of old cases, converged on that one moment, on that one symbol. It was as if the city itself were whispering to him, urging him to confront the shadows of a past that he had long tried to forget. Outside, the drizzle had given way to a cooler, more determined rain. Mercer stepped out of the building for a moment, drawn once again to the muted ambience of the city streets. Under the shelter of a nearby awning, he allowed himself a brief moment of introspection. The interplay of rain and light, the subtle vibrations of the urban night, all conspired to create a scene that was both haunting and mesmerizing. In that moment, he couldn't help but wonder if the echoes of the past were beginning to stir, if the forces he had long tried to keep at bay were now emerging with renewed vigor. The victim at Elmwood Avenue was only the latest sign, a cryptic beacon that hinted at a deeper, more pervasive presence. And as Mercer stared out into the rain-washed city, he silently vowed that he would follow these clues wherever they led, even if it meant confronting the darkest corners of his own soul. With the rain as his constant companion and the echoes of ritualistic whispers lingering in his ears, Mercer returned to his office. There, amidst the clutter of evidence and the soft hum of fluorescent lights, he began to draft a preliminary report, a report that would not only document the crime, but also serve as a starting point for an investigation that promised to be as enigmatic as it was perilous. Every stroke of his pen carried a weight of determination and foreboding. The symbols, the eerie residue, and the chilling ambiance of the crime scene all pointed towards something that defied conventional understanding. And as Mercer wrote, he couldn't help but feel that he was on the threshold of a mystery that would test the very limits of his resolve, a mystery that, with every passing moment, was beginning to whisper of ancient secrets, forgotten rituals, and the inexorable pull of the unseen. In that quiet, tension-laden space between routine duty and the unraveling of a greater enigma, Mercer felt the first true tremors of the horror that lay ahead. The echoes of terror had only just begun to sound, and as the day edged towards twilight, the city prepared to reveal further fragments of a puzzle that promised to blur the lines between the known and the unknowable. The steady murmur of the precinct was a constant backdrop as Mercer settled at his desk. The evidence and photographs from Elmwood Avenue splayed out before him like pieces of an unsolvable puzzle. Despite the clinical order of the room, his mind remained ensnared by the mystery of the symbols and the unsettling residue that defied explanation. Every detail, from the intricate carvings on the wall to the silent whispers of his own recollections, seemed to pull him deeper into a labyrinth of the occult and his own buried past. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie. Mercer looked up as Dr. Evelyn Reyes stepped inside. Unlike the harsh fluorescent glare of the main hall, her presence brought with it a gentle warmth and a quiet intensity that was both reassuring and probing. Clad in a dark sweater and practical trousers, she carried an air of both scholarly detachment and personal empathy. "James," she greeted him, her voice low yet clear, as though she were sharing a secret. "I've been reviewing the forensic report and the preliminary details of the case. May I sit?" Mercer nodded, pushing aside the scattered files to make room. "Of course, Evelyn. I could use another pair of eyes on this," he replied, his tone guarded yet open, as if he sensed that her insight might bridge the gap between the rational and the inexplicable. They settled into the cramped space beside his desk, the dim light flickering against old case files and the steady hum of the printer in the background. For a long moment, neither spoke, allowing the silence to settle like dust in the corners. Finally, Evelyn broke the quiet. "I've never seen residue like this before," she said, leaning forward to point at a small, high-resolution photograph of the etched symbols. "The composition is unlike any common substance found at a crime scene. It's as if the markings themselves are infused with an energy, something that, well, defies conventional explanation." Mercer ran a hand through his dark hair, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "I've seen enough strange things in my time to know that the extraordinary often hides behind the veil of the mundane. But these symbols, they're calling out to something I can't quite place. It reminds me of something I once read in an old case file, a reference to rituals that bordered on the metaphysical." Evelyn's interest sharpened. "Rituals? You mean to suggest that this might be more than a simple murder, a message, perhaps, or even a reawakening of something ancient?" He hesitated before replying, the weight of his unspoken memories pressing in. "There's a case years ago that I closed when I never fully understood. It involved a series of similar markings and a series of inexplicable events. At the time, I chalked it up to the ramblings of a deranged mind, but now I wonder if I was too hasty. I wonder if some forces, hidden in the folds of time, are at work again." Evelyn's eyes softened with empathy. "James, I've seen that look before, when someone is on the brink of confronting something they'd rather leave in the past. But sometimes the past isn't something you can simply outrun. It follows you, manifests in the shadows of your present." A long silence stretched between them as Mercer stared at the faded photograph. The dim light seemed to draw out every crack and curve of the etched symbol, as if the image itself were alive with intent. His mind drifted back to a moment he had long tried to forget, a night in his early days on the force when he first encountered a similar symbol scrawled in a derelict building. In that instance, the memory had been a mere footnote in his career, quickly buried under the weight of bureaucracy and routine. Yet now, it resurfaced with an insistence that could not be ignored. "Tell me," Evelyn prompted gently, "what do you remember from that case?" Mercer exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the intricate lines of the photograph. "It was different then," he began, his voice low and measured. "I was younger, perhaps more open to the possibility that the world held mysteries beyond the everyday. There was an incident, a murder in a forgotten part of the city. The scene was staged almost like a ritual. The victim, the symbols, even the residue were all there, but at the time I couldn't piece it together. I dismissed it as an isolated aberration, the work of a killer with a penchant for theatrics. I never thought much about it afterward." Evelyn studied him closely, her brow furrowing with concern and curiosity. "And now you feel a connection between that old case and what we're dealing with today?" "Yes," Mercer replied softly, his voice laden with a quiet resignation. "I can't shake the impression that these events are tied together, that something from the past has been awakened. I've been haunted by dreams and memories, images of dark figures and ritualistic scenes that seem almost too vivid to be mere imagination. And every time I see these symbols, I feel that same cold dread creeping in." Evelyn reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Sometimes the past calls out for resolution, James. It doesn't matter how much we wish it would remain buried. The truth has a way of emerging, and perhaps it's time we faced it head-on." Her words resonated deeply with him, stirring a mixture of determination and trepidation. Mercer found himself wanting to confide more about the sleepless nights, the inexplicable visions, and the pervasive sense of guilt that clung to him like a second skin. But for now, the conversation remained tethered to the case at hand. "We need to dig deeper into the archives," he said, his tone shifting from introspection to resolve. "There's got to be a thread connecting these symbols, a pattern that might lead us to the source of this curse, if that's what it is." Evelyn nodded. "I have some contacts in the local university's history department, as well as a few private collectors who specialize in obscure occult literature. They might help us decode these markings and trace their origins. And while we do that, we need to look at the victim's background more closely. Anything unusual, any connection to those old rituals." As they pored over the case files and cross-referenced details from old reports, the conversation slowly wove together a tapestry of half-forgotten lore and modern forensic analysis. The room filled with the soft rustle of paper and the quiet murmur of shared memories, a synergy that seemed to momentarily bridge the gap between rational inquiry and the realm of the uncanny. At one point, as Mercer flipped through a brittle, yellowed journal recovered from a storage room in the precinct archives, he paused at a passage that described a series of ritualistic ceremonies intended to invoke an ancient force. The language was archaic and cryptic, yet the descriptions mirrored too many of the details he had observed at the crime scene. This could be it," Mercer murmured, tracing a trembling finger over the faded ink. "It talks about invoking a presence through precise alignments of symbols, of sacrifices that blur the line between life and death." Evelyn leaned over, her eyes scanning the page. It's as if the author believed that certain rituals could open a door, a portal perhaps, to something that existed on the fringes of our reality. If that's true, then what we're seeing might not just be an act of violence. It could be an attempt to summon or awaken that force. Mercer's heart pounded in his chest as the implications sank in. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying, a convergence of his deepest fears and the unyielding pull of mysteries that lay beyond the safe confines of everyday logic. In that moment, the past and the present seemed to merge, each echo and detail reinforcing the notion that the case was far more than a random act of brutality. "Do you think the victim knew what was coming?" Mercer asked quietly, more to himself than to Evelyn. She paused, considering the question with a furrowed brow. "It's hard to say. In some rituals, the sacrifice is offered willingly, in a misguided bid for transcendence or power. In others, it's a forced act, a dark necessity. We need to find out which it is. And that means talking to anyone who might have known the victim, friends, family, even former associates. every piece of their life could hold a clue. As the afternoon deepened into a languid twilight, Mercer and Evelyn continued their methodical work. Each new scrap of information, each obscure reference in an old manuscript, added a subtle layer to the emerging picture. The conversation veered from the mundane details of police procedure to the extraordinary implications of occult lore. And through it all, Mercer felt a familiar but unwelcome stirring of something old, a restless energy that hinted at unresolved secrets buried deep within him. By the time the precinct's lights dimmed in preparation for the night shift, the pair had compiled a preliminary list of potential leads. Among them was a name, a reclusive historian with extensive knowledge of local occult traditions, and an address that pointed to an old, abandoned building rumored to have once been a clandestine meeting place for those who practiced forbidden rites. "James," Evelyn said softly as she gathered her notes, "I know this is more than just another case for you, but if anyone can navigate these troubled waters, it's you. You've seen these shadows before, even if you've tried to leave them behind. Perhaps it's time to face them and find some answers." Mercer met her gaze, the weight of her words mingling with his own uncertainty. There was an undeniable part of him that craved the clarity of confronting the darkness head-on, even as every instinct urged him to retreat into the safety of routine. Yet he knew that the path ahead was not one he could avoid. With a steadying breath, he replied, "I'm ready. We follow the threads, however tenuous they may be, and we'll see where they lead us into the heart of these mysteries, and perhaps into the heart of my own past." As the night claimed the city once more, Mercer sat back in his chair, a quiet resolve taking root amidst the fading echoes of the day. Outside, the rain resumed its gentle cadence, each drop a reminder of the unceasing flow of time, and of the secrets that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In that fragile, in-between space of weary light and encroaching darkness, the threads of the mystery began to intertwine. And with every passing moment, Mercer felt that the boundary between what was known and what was hidden grew ever thinner, a promise that the answers, however elusive, were closer than he dared to imagine. The following morning, as a pallid light filtered through the grime on the city's windows, Mercer felt a pull that was both irresistible and foreboding, a summons to a realm of knowledge he'd long kept at arm's length. The case files, the cryptic symbols, and the disquieting residue had all converged in his mind, urging him to seek answers not in the sterile halls of the precinct, but among the faded pages of ancient lore. Determined, Mercer arranged a meeting with Professor Adrian Voss, a reclusive scholar whose name was whispered among occult enthusiasts as much as it was known in the arcane circles of forgotten ritual. The rendezvous took place in the back room of an antiquarian bookstore, a space that seemed to have been suspended in time. Dim light struggled against dusty air, and every shelf was burdened with tomes whose spines promised secrets from centuries past. Professor Voss himself was a study in eccentricity, with wisps of unkempt hair and eyes that burned with an almost feverish intensity. He greeted Mercer and Dr. Evelyn Reyes as if they were long-awaited guests in his private sanctum. Over cups of tepid tea that carried the faint aroma of aged paper and forgotten incense, Mercer recounted the details of Elmwood Avenue, the meticulously etched symbols, the eerie residue, and the inexplicable aura of dread that seemed to seep from every crack of the crime scene. Voss's reaction was measured, yet his voice trembled with barely contained excitement as he leaned over a brittle manuscript spread open on a scarred wooden table. These symbols, they're not random. They echo the designs found in texts dating back to the early Renaissance, rituals intended to pierce the veil between our world and that which lies beyond, he explained. His finger, ink-stained and deliberate, traced the looping lines and interwoven shapes that Mercer had painstakingly documented. The professor's tone carried a duality of scholarly rigor and a personal warning. This was no common vandalism or a psychotic's fancy. It was a call, an invocation. For hours, the three delved into the delicate pages of ancient records. Every passage they unearthed spoke of ceremonies held in secret, of rites that required precision and a willingness to confront the unknown. In one particularly fragile folio, Voss's voice dropped to a whisper as he read aloud. In the sacred texts, it is written that these symbols, when aligned under the proper celestial configuration, act as conduits for primordial forces, forces that can be summoned to enact both divine retribution and unfathomable chaos. The words sent a shiver down Mercer's spine. They resonated with an eerie familiarity, echoing not only the particulars of the crime, but also a half-remembered nightmare from his past. Between the yellowed lines and faded ink, Mercer recognized hints of a cult, a secretive order that had long since been relegated to the margins of history. The rituals described were meticulous, almost surgical in their execution, and seemed to outline a procedure not only for the taking of life, but for the deliberate opening of a portal to something other. Each symbol and every arcane instruction stitched together a tapestry of darkness, one that hinted that the murder on Elmwood Avenue was merely one act in a larger, ongoing performance of a cult reawakening. As dusk crept over the city, the small study in the antiquarian bookstore felt like a cocoon where past and present intermingled. Mercer's mind raced with new questions. Had the victim been a willing participant, a sacrifice, perhaps in pursuit of forbidden power? Or was this act merely the spark for something far more sinister, a prelude to the re-emergence of a force that had slumbered for centuries? In that charged, silent space, as the professor's words faded into the rustle of turning pages, Mercer realized that every detail he had painstakingly gathered was a thread in a vast, intricate web. This web stretched across time and belief, intertwining his own troubled history with dark forces that defied explanation. And as he left the bookstore with Evelyn at his side, the fading light of day seemed to whisper that the answers, if they ever could be found, lay deep within the realms of the occult, waiting to be uncovered, piece by painful piece. Mercer's determination led him and Evelyn to a neglected wing of the city's historical society, a building whose crumbling facade and silent corridors spoke of forgotten epochs. Here, amid the dust and decay of a long-abandoned archive room, they were to meet the man whispered about in occult circles as the cult archivist. Inside a cramped study lit only by the wavering glow of an ancient desk lamp, they found him hunched over a battered ledger. His presence was as unassuming as it was unnerving, a gaunt figure with pale, penetrating eyes, his hands stained with the residue of time as he carefully turned brittle pages. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and faded incense, a combination that hinted at secrets sealed away for decades. Detective Mercer, Dr. Reyes, the archivist said, his voice a quiet rasp that resonated in the silence of the room. "I've been expecting you." He motioned for them to sit at a narrow table cluttered with yellowed manuscripts, cracked photographs, and odd relics whose origins defied easy explanation. Mercer took a deep breath and regarded the man before him, a keeper of histories too shadowed to be embraced by mainstream academia. "I need to know what you can tell us about these symbols," he said, sliding a folded page with a reproduction of the intricate design across the table. "They're not just random markings. They're part of something bigger." The archivist's eyes lingered on the page, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the contours of the symbol. After a long, thoughtful pause, he began. "These markings belong to an ancient rite practiced by a cult that once operated in secret throughout this very city. Their aim was to breach the veil that separates our world from that other realm." His voice dropped to a near whisper, as if afraid the very sound of the words might summon the dark force they spoke of. Evelyn leaned in, her interest evident. "Other realm," she echoed softly. "Yes," the archivist replied. "Legends passed down through cryptic texts tell of a primordial presence, a force that exists in the spaces between life and death, chaos and order. In their rituals, the cult would align these symbols with certain celestial events, believing that they could open a portal, even if only briefly, to commune with or harness that power." He paused, his gaze meeting Mercer's, as though trying to measure the detective's resolve. These rituals were not mere acts of violence. They were meticulously orchestrated ceremonies intended to invoke something. beyond human understanding. A heavy silence settled over the table as Mercer absorbed the weight of the words. He recalled the echoes of that old case from years ago and the furtive, ghost-like visions that had plagued his dreams. Had those memories been more than nightmares, a dark residue of a past he'd tried to forget? The archivist continued, his tone measured and methodical. The texts I possess suggest that the cult, known by a name now lost to time, believed that certain bloodlines were inherently connected to the forces they worshipped. There are accounts, nearly mythic in their detail, that speak of a guardian, a soul marked by guilt and destiny, meant to either close or open the gate. Some scholars have speculated that this guardian might even be someone like you, Detective. Mercer's breath hitched. The notion that his own lineage might be entwined with this occult legacy was both disconcerting and oddly resonant with the stirrings of forgotten memories that had begun to surface in recent weeks. His hands tightened around the edge of the table as he struggled to maintain his composure. How? How is that possible? He managed, his voice low, edged with both incredulity and a dawning fear. I've never believed in such things. I'm a detective, not a priest or a prophet. The archivist offered a wry, melancholic smile. Belief and skepticism often share the same shadow, Detective. The evidence is not of the sort that can be measured or tested by modern methods. It's woven into the fabric of history, into myths, symbols, and the unspoken connections between events that, on the surface, seem unrelated. But when you start pulling at these threads, you may find that they converge on a pattern that is deeply personal. Evelyn's steady gaze moved between Mercer and the archivist. So, you're saying that this latest murder, these ritualistic symbols, could be part of an ongoing agenda, a resurgence of these ancient rites? Indeed, the archivist replied. The resurgence may be intentional, a deliberate attempt to reopen a door that has been sealed for centuries. And if that is so, then the events we are witnessing now, the murder on Elmwood Avenue, the residue at the scene, the echoes in your memories, are all components of a ritual whose full purpose is yet to be revealed. The detective's mind raced as he considered the implications. Every piece of evidence, every inexplicable detail from recent days, was now recast in a new, ominous light. And what of the ritual site? He asked quietly. Is there any indication of where the final act might be carried out? The archivist's eyes darkened as he rifled through a worn leather-bound volume. Finally, he extracted a faded map, spreading it carefully on the table. His finger traced a route leading to a forgotten sector of the city, a derelict church surrounded by overgrown weeds and the scars of time. This, he said, is believed to be one of the primary sites where the cult once met. The texts speak of it as a place of convergence, where the energies of the ritual could be most potent. It might well be the locus for the next ceremony. Mercer studied the map intently, the chill of inevitability creeping over him. Here was a tangible lead, a physical location where the abstract and the uncanny intersected. Yet with it came the unsettling possibility that the dark history the archivist had described was not entirely confined to myth. For a long while, no one spoke. The quiet tick of an old clock on the wall punctuated the silence as each person at the table wrestled with their own thoughts. Mercer's eyes flickered with a mixture of determination and trepidation. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but the call of these ancient secrets was one he could no longer ignore. Finally, Mercer broke the silence. I need to go there. I need to see for myself what remains of those rituals, and perhaps understand what part of my own past has been calling me back. The archivist's gaze softened with a blend of pity and resolve. Be cautious, Detective. The road you walk is fraught with dangers that are not always visible to the naked eye. And remember, the past never truly dies. It merely waits for the moment to resurface. Evelyn reached out and laid a steadying hand on Mercer's arm. We'll go together, she said firmly. Whatever we find, we face it as a team. As they gathered the documents and maps, the tangible remnants of a history that defied the modern world, Mercer felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. The archivist's words, laden with both warning and hope, echoed in his mind. In that quiet, dust-laden archive, he realized that the mystery was no longer confined to distant legends. It was personal, immediate, and it beckoned him into the heart of darkness, where the answers lay hidden among the echoes of time. That evening, long after the archivist's cryptic words had faded into the silence of his temporary study, Mercer sat alone in his apartment. The room was cloaked in twilight, its meager light dancing against the shadows that clung to every surface. Spread before him were the maps, documents, and yellowed pages that hinted at an ancient past. But amid these relics of forgotten lore, it was the weight of his own memories that pressed hardest on his chest. As the rain tapped a persistent rhythm against the window, Mercer found his thoughts drifting back to a time he had long tried to bury. The archivist's mention of a guardian, someone bound by fate and steeped in guilt, had stirred dormant recollections. He reached for a faded photograph tucked away in a battered envelope, its edges softened by time. In the grainy image, he saw himself as a younger man, filled with the fierce certainty of youthful resolve, yet with an unmistakable vulnerability in his eyes. In the silence of the room, memories surged like fragments of a half-remembered dream. The scene shifted, and suddenly he was no longer in his modest apartment, but in a grim, rain-soaked alley from years past, a place where a similar darkness had once left its mark on his soul. Flashback. It was a night not unlike this one. Mercer, then a rookie with too much hope and too little experience, had been assigned to a case that defied explanation. The scene had been an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, a place where the smell of rust and decay mingled with something far more sinister. The victim lay sprawled amidst a chaotic arrangement of symbols, their lines and curves drawn with a precision that seemed to mock the randomness of death. He remembered crouching over the body, the beam of his flashlight trembling in his grasp. In that spectral light, the carved symbols on the concrete appeared to pulse as if alive. His heartbeat had raced with a mix of adrenaline and an unnameable dread. There had been whispers, too, murmurs that he had first chalked up to the wind. But now, with the benefit of hindsight and the weight of his current discoveries, he understood that those whispers were echoes of a ritual long forgotten. A senior detective had later remarked in the quiet aftermath, "Some nights, you feel like you're not alone even when the streets are empty." Mercer had tried to laugh it off, but even then, a cold shiver had slithered down his spine. That case had left a scar, not just on the city, but on his very perception of the world, a world where unseen forces could stir in the dark, where the rational and the inexplicable danced a perilous waltz. Return to the present. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Mercer with a bittersweet ache. He closed his eyes, the image of the warehouse and the rhythmic pulse of those cryptic symbols still vivid in his mind. The archivist's revelation about his possible connection to these occult rituals mingled with his own recollections, blurring the line between duty and destiny. Had he always been a part of this cycle, unknowingly drawn into a dance with shadows that now threatened to consume him? A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, pulling him back to the present. Mercer opened his eyes and stared at the scattered pages on his desk. Each document now seemed to breathe with a life of its own, each symbol a whisper from a past he could no longer ignore. His thoughts turned to the map, the faded ink leading to the derelict church. The place promised answers, but it also promised to dredge up memories best left undisturbed. He rose from his desk, the chair scraping across the worn wooden floor, and moved toward the narrow window. Outside, the city was a blur of rain and neon, a living testament to both decay and resilience. Yet even in its ceaseless motion, Mercer sensed a stasis, a holding pattern where the past was eternally present. His mind wandered to fragments of dreams he had lately been having, visions of an old chapel in ruins, a chorus of voices murmuring ancient incantations, and the unmistakable glow of ritual symbols that burned into his memory. In these dreams, he was both observer and participant, caught in a tableau of fate that he could neither escape nor fully understand. With a trembling hand, Mercer reached up to trace the outline of one of the symbols that now haunted his thoughts, a looping, intricate design that had first appeared on the crime scene at Elmwood Avenue and resurfaced in the dark corridors of his mind. The touch was cool and deliberate, as though the symbol itself carried a memory, an echo of rituals performed long ago. He recalled a particular night, a case from early in his career where he had nearly lost himself in the labyrinth of occult mysteries. He remembered the piercing cold of the night, the eerie silence of an abandoned building, and the sound of his own heartbeat echoing off the walls. That night, a voice in his mind had whispered warnings, urging him to turn away, to abandon the pursuit of truths that lay hidden in darkness. But he had pressed on, driven by a relentless need to uncover the secrets behind the symbols. And though he had solved the case, a part of him had remained forever changed, marked by a burden of guilt and a sense of foreboding that had grown with each passing year. Now, those ghosts of the past had resurfaced with renewed vigor. The archivist's words and the evidence before him were not isolated phenomena. They were interwoven threads in a tapestry that spanned decades, linking his present to a lineage of darkness he could neither deny nor fully comprehend. Mercer sank back into his chair, his gaze fixed on the dim glow of the city through the rain-streaked window. The ache of old memories was tempered by a fierce resolve. If the past was calling him, demanding that he confront its long-hidden secrets, then he would answer. The path ahead led to the abandoned church, a physical manifestation of the convergence between his personal history and the occult forces at work. It was there, amidst crumbling stone and whispered legends, that he hoped to find the answers he so desperately sought. The night deepened, and as the clock ticked toward the witching hour, Mercer felt both the pull of fractured memories and the weight of an uncertain future. In that fragile moment, he understood that every step he took toward the church was not just a step toward solving a mystery. It was a step into the very heart of his own soul, where the echoes of guilt, regret, and destiny intertwined in an inescapable dance. Gathering the scattered remnants of his resolve, Mercer rose once more. The journey into the darkness was inevitable, and with it came the hope, however dim, that by facing the shadows of his past, he might finally begin to mend the fractures within. Outside, the rain persisted, a steady cadence marking the passage of time and the inexorable pull of fate. The storm had deepened by the time Mercer finally stepped out into the cold embrace of the night. The city, usually a maelstrom of urban clamor, had surrendered to a more somnolent terror. The rain had subdued its usual din into a constant, insistent whisper that seemed to murmur secrets in every alley. Tonight, it was as if the heavens themselves mourned the sins of the past. Mercer paused on his stoop, the envelope of mist and rain blurring the boundary between street and sky. In his hand, he clutched the folded map the archivist had given him, a map whose faded ink promised to lead him to the derelict church, the alleged nexus of the cult's long-dormant rituals. Every droplet of rain that slid down his weathered coat carried with it a promise of what was to come, each one a silent herald of the gathering dread that had begun to permeate the air. Inside the cramped foyer of his apartment building, the passage of time was marked by the echo of his footsteps and the quiet hum of his own racing thoughts. He paused briefly in the lobby, his eyes lingering on the peeling paint and worn photographs of a bygone era, as if the building itself were a relic of a past too intertwined with his own. There was no escape from the feeling that every stone, every crevice held a memory of those who had once faced similar fates, a city of ghosts, and now, perhaps, a city of prophecies. Before leaving, he sent a terse text to Evelyn, heading out. "Meet me at the usual place in 15. He trusted her implicitly. Her presence had become a beacon in these murky times, a steady, rational counterpoint to the chaos that threatened to consume him. As he stepped back into the night, Mercer felt the cold wind scrape across his face, an icy caress that both awakened and warned him. At the small parking area near the precinct, a battered sedan waited, its headlights slicing through the downpour like twin swords of light. Evelyn emerged from the shadows, her expression resolute despite the storm that battered around her. Together, they climbed into the car, a temporary haven from the relentless barrage of rain and the encroaching night. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, the cityscape shifted around them. Neon signs blurred into vibrant streaks of color, while old brick buildings and modern facades passed by in a surreal, dreamlike cadence. The vehicle's wipers moved in a ceaseless rhythm, a metronome to the steady hum of anticipation that thrummed beneath the surface of their conversation. Evelyn broke the silence as the car navigated a labyrinth of narrow lanes. James, I've been reading through some of the texts you mentioned. There are warnings, almost apocalyptic in tone, about aligning certain symbols with cosmic events. They say that when the celestial bodies are in a particular arrangement, the threshold between our world and something else becomes dangerously thin. Mercer nodded, his eyes fixed on the glistening road ahead. I've seen those descriptions in my dreams, in fragments I can't fully decipher. And every time I see that symbol, it's like a key turning in a lock I've tried to keep sealed. His voice was low, a mixture of dread and determination. I keep wondering if I'm being drawn into something I can't control, a cycle of events I'm doomed to repeat. Evelyn reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. We face it together, James. There's no turning back now, and I won't let you bear this burden alone. Her steady gaze, illuminated by the intermittent glow of the dashboard, conveyed a promise of unwavering support. Their destination loomed on the outskirts of the city, a forgotten quarter where modernity had faded into the rusted relics of industrial decline. The derelict church emerged from the gloom like a specter of a bygone era, its once proud spires now chipped and broken, its stained glass windows shattered into jagged fragments that caught the light in ghostly patterns. Overgrown, ivy clung to the stone walls, as if trying to reclaim the building for nature, a silent testament to the inexorable march of time. Parking a few blocks away, Mercer and Evelyn stepped into the storm. The rain was now a torrential downpour, and the wind howled through deserted streets. Each step toward the church was measured, deliberate, a journey not just across the physical distance, but into a realm where the boundary between the known and the unknown blurred. As they approached the heavy wooden doors, Mercer paused. The ancient wood was swollen by moisture, its grain darkened with age and neglect. He hesitated for a brief moment, his mind awash with memories and unspoken fears. He thought of the archivist's words, the murmur of forgotten rituals, the notion of a guardian born from guilt and destiny. Was he truly that guardian? Was it his fate to be the linchpin between worlds, to either seal or unleash the darkness that lay dormant within these walls? Evelyn's voice broke through his reverie. James, look. She pointed to a set of faint, almost imperceptible carvings along the doorframe. The symbols, worn by time, but still unmistakable, echoed the designs he had seen at Elmwood Avenue, etched into the very fabric of his memories. A chill ran through him, a visceral reminder that he was not just an investigator on a case, but a man ensnared in a narrative that defied simple explanation. He reached out, brushing his fingertips over the damp carvings. The cool touch of the stone and the lingering residue of what might have been centuries-old ink sent a shiver down his spine. These marks, they're here for a reason, he murmured. They're a sign that we're in the right place, or perhaps that we've walked into a trap. The air around them was heavy with the scent of moss and decay, punctuated by a subtle, almost indiscernible odor that reminded Mercer of old incense and something darker, a hint of burnt offerings. It was as if the church itself exhaled a long-held secret, one that had been gathering dust until this very moment. Together, they pushed open the creaking door. Inside, the vast, cavernous interior was shrouded in darkness, save for the intermittent flashes of lightning that illuminated intricate stonework and rows of pews covered in dust. The silence was profound, a silence that carried with it echoes of forgotten chants and long-forgotten prayers. It was a space that vibrated with the residual energy of rituals performed in secret, a place where time itself seemed to have paused in deference to the gravity of its history. Mercer and Evelyn moved slowly, their footsteps muted against the worn flagstones. The beam of Mercer's flashlight cut through the oppressive dark, revealing fleeting details. An altar, barely visible under layers of grime. Symbols painted on the floor, their edges blurred by the passage of time. And a series of arches that seemed to lead deeper into the building, into shadows where the air felt charged with anticipation. Every step felt like a descent deeper into a labyrinth of both stone and memory. Mercer's heart pounded in his chest as he felt the pull of something ancient and powerful, a force that had been dormant, waiting for the moment when its summoning would be complete. In the quiet moments between their cautious steps, he could almost hear the distant murmur of voices, as if the very walls whispered secrets in a language lost to modern ears. In one of the side corridors, a mural caught his eye, a faded depiction of a ritual, its imagery both mesmerizing and horrifying. Figures were arranged in a circle, their faces contorted in expressions of ecstasy and torment. In the center, a symbol identical to the ones he had seen so often was emblazoned in bold strokes. Mercer lingered before it, a lump forming in his throat as recognition and dread mingled in his veins. Evelyn joined him, her eyes scanning the mural with both analytical precision and a deep-seated unease. This must have been one of their ceremonial halls, she whispered, a place where they intended to breach the veil, to reach out for what they believed lay beyond. Mercer nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the revelation. Every detail, every careful carving and faded pigment was a testament to a past steeped in forbidden knowledge. And now, in this forsaken edifice, the past was not dead. It was a living, breathing presence that sought to reclaim its place in the world. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of settling stone and the distant rumble of thunder. Mercer's thoughts churned with the inevitability of what lay. Ahead, a confrontation not only with the remnants of a clandestine cult, but with the specters of his own past. In the heart of the church, in a vast chamber where the remnants of stained glass windows cast fragmented rainbows across the stone floor, Mercer and Evelyn paused at the threshold of what appeared to be the altar room. Here, the energy was palpable, an electric tension that set every nerve on edge. The intricate carvings on the altar, the precise alignment of symbols on the floor, and the eerie, unyielding silence coalesced into a sense of impending reckoning. Mercer's mind was a tumult of thoughts and memories. The ancient texts, the archivist's warnings, and his own recurring dreams all converged in this moment. The symbol that had haunted his every step, the mark that might well have been his destiny, lay before him in stark relief, a promise of answers, of closure, and perhaps of damnation. "James," Evelyn said softly, her voice a fragile thread in the overwhelming darkness. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." Her words were both a comfort and a challenge, a reminder that in the midst of this gathering dread, they were not alone. Mercer took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs with a mixture of fear and resolve. In that suspended moment, with every shadow and every whisper of the ancient building urging him forward, he knew that the true test of his courage was only just beginning. The altar room that beckoned, a silent stage set for the unfolding of a ritual that might shatter the boundaries of his understanding, and perhaps the very fabric of his soul. With a final glance at Evelyn, Mercer stepped forward into the unknown, the weight of destiny and fractured memories propelling him deeper into the heart of darkness. Outside, the storm raged on, a ceaseless drumbeat to the unfolding of events that would soon challenge everything he thought he knew about the past, the present, and the ominous promise of what lay ahead. The air in the altar room was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of damp stone and something older, something that smelled of decay, of burnt offerings long since turned to dust. Mercer moved slowly, the beam of his flashlight tracing the jagged edges of shattered stained glass windows, casting fractured colors onto the stone floor. The rain outside had softened into a rhythmic tapping against the ruined roof, a metronome marking each hesitant step deeper into the chamber. Evelyn followed close behind, her breath slow and measured. The silence between them was not mere caution. It was reverence, the unspoken understanding that they had stepped onto a threshold between the known and the abyss. At the center of the room stood the altar, a slab of ancient stone covered in a layer of dust that had settled over decades of abandonment. But something was off. Mercer could feel it before he saw it. The dust had been disturbed. Someone had been here recently. His fingers hovered over the symbols etched into the altar's surface, tracing their familiar curves. The same symbols that had appeared on crime scenes, on walls scrawled in blood, in the margins of the archivist's texts. Here, the symbols on the altar formed a perfect circle, their curves and angles arranged with deliberate precision. In the center lay a shallow basin, a void etched into the stone, as if carved to receive offerings. Mercer's pulse quickened as he observed the intricate pattern. The arrangement was no random act of vandalism. It was a ritualistic design, a carefully constructed gateway meant to bridge this world and another. A subtle, almost imperceptible vibration began to emanate from the stone. At first, it was merely a gentle hum that blended with the steady cadence of the rain. Then, as Mercer's hand hovered closer to the basin, the sound deepened into a resonant chant that seemed to come from within the altar itself. The low, hollow notes pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Evelyn's soft voice broke the heavy silence. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on the center of the circle. The sound was otherworldly, a spectral melody that defied explanation, as if the very stone were speaking in a forgotten tongue. "It's as if the altar is alive," Mercer replied, his tone a mixture of awe and apprehension. Despite the chill that crept up his spine, an inexplicable pull urged him forward. He extended a trembling hand and let his fingertips brush the cool, damp surface of the stone. In that instant, a surge of sensations, memories, dread, and a strange sense of familiarity coursed through him. Images flashed before his eyes. Shadowed figures in cloaks gathered around a blazing fire, their voices raised in an ancient incantation, the flicker of torchlight dancing over weathered stone. And somewhere amidst it all, his own face, etched with both determination and torment. The vision was fragmented and elusive, yet it spoke of a past he had long tried to bury. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, as though the act of contact had awakened something dormant. Mercer's heartbeat pounded in his ears, syncing with the rhythm of the ancient call. The symbols around the basin began to glow faintly, a pulsating luminescence that cast eerie shadows along the altar's surface. In the center, the void deepened, its dark depths swirling with an ethereal light that pulsed in time with the chant. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes widening as she noticed the change. "James, look at the basin, it's reacting." Her voice was hushed, almost reverent, as she pointed toward the growing light. Mercer leaned in, transfixed. The gentle glow coalesced into a vortex of shifting shadows and faint iridescence, a portal of sorts opening before him. The air around the altar vibrated with an energy that was at once mesmerizing and menacing. It was as if the barrier between the tangible and the unseen was dissolving, inviting him to cross a threshold that bridged centuries of occult ritual and the raw force of the unknown. A sudden gust of wind roared through the chamber, snuffing out Mercer's flashlight for a heartbeat. When the beam flickered back to life, the vortex was unmistakably real, a dark, swirling aperture that beckoned with a silent promise of revelation and peril. The sound of the chant rose to a crescendo, every syllable imbued with a sense of ancient authority. In that charged moment, Mercer felt the full weight of destiny bearing down on him. The swirling darkness seemed to call to him personally, as though it were not merely a relic of a forgotten cult, but a mirror reflecting his own soul. Was this the prophesied convergence, the moment when the Guardian, burdened by guilt and haunted by memory, would either seal the breach or be consumed by it. His heart pounded as he considered his next move. The rational part of him screamed to retreat, to flee from the abyss that threatened to swallow him whole. Yet another, deeper part, one that had been stirred by years of suppressed memories and unanswered questions, compelled him to step forward. With a trembling hand, Mercer reached toward the vortex. At the precise moment his fingertips brushed the swirling darkness, a voice, faint, sonorous, and achingly familiar, echoed through the chamber. The sound seemed to come from the depths of the void, reverberating through the stone and the air alike. "Welcome home, James." The whisper, laden with both warmth and warning, sent a shockwave through his very being. In that suspended heartbeat of time, as the rain drummed a relentless rhythm outside and the ancient altar pulsed with forbidden energy, Mercer stood on the brink of a transformation he could neither predict nor fully comprehend. And as his hand lingered on the threshold between the known and the unknowable, he realized that this moment marked both an ending and a beginning, a point at which the echoes of the past would either be laid to rest or would rise again to reshape his destiny. In the charged silence that followed the spectral greeting, time itself seemed to loosen its grip. Mercer's hand, still outstretched toward the vortex, trembled with the weight of destiny. The swirling darkness, alive with an ancient, almost sentient energy, beckoned him closer, a silent invitation to cross a boundary that separated the familiar from the unfathomable. For a moment, the world around him faded. The dim light of the altar room, the distant drumming of rain on broken stone, and even Evelyn's steady presence, all were swallowed by the overwhelming pull of the vortex. Mercer's vision blurred as he felt an irresistible force tug at him, as if the very fabric of reality was bending inward to draw him into a realm of perpetual twilight. Then, without warning, his fingertips made contact with the cold, ethereal surface of the portal. In that heartbeat, the world shattered into a cascade of memory and sensation. He was plunged into a void where light and shadow intermingled in a surreal tapestry of sound and color, a realm where past, present, and possibility converged. Images, vivid and fragmented, burst before his eyes. He saw cloaked figures gathered around blazing pyres, their fervent chants echoing in a language older than time. He witnessed moments of unspeakable violence and profound sorrow, the bitter price exacted by rituals long forgotten. And among these visions, Mercer saw himself, a younger version of the man he once was, eyes filled with both hope and terror, standing at the precipice of a destiny he had tried desperately to escape. Amid the swirling chaos, a presence emerged, a spectral figure cloaked in shadow and light. Its form was indistinct, shifting like smoke, yet its eyes shone with an intense familiarity. The figure's voice, deep and resonant, spoke directly into Mercer's soul. "I am the echo of your past, the guardian of your fate. You have been chosen to face the darkness within and without." Mercer's heart pounded in defiant rhythm. For an eternity in that suspended moment, he felt as if he were both observer and participant in an ancient rite. The spectral figure moved closer, its gaze penetrating every hidden corner of his mind. Mercer struggled to steady himself against the overwhelming surge of memories and emotions, a torrent of guilt, regret, and a lingering, desperate hope for redemption. In a voice that trembled with both determination and vulnerability, Mercer responded, "I will not let you, or my past, consume me. I choose to confront what lies within, to reclaim my own destiny." For a long, breathless moment, the void pulsed with his declaration. The spectral guardian's form wavered, as if stirred by the force of his resolve. The chanting, which had once risen in an oppressive crescendo, now softened into a measured, echoing beat. The vortex itself responded, its dark tendrils flickering as if an acknowledgement of Mercer's defiance. As his words faded, the world around him began to coalesce. The swirling mists of memory and nightmare slowly receded, and he felt himself being drawn back through the threshold. With a final, shuddering gasp, Mercer's consciousness returned to the altar room. The brilliant, otherworldly glow of the vortex dimmed to a gentle pulse. And then, almost imperceptibly, it began to close. He stood rooted to the spot, every nerve alight with the raw intensity of what he had just experienced. In the silence that followed, the altar symbols seemed to exhale, their glow softening to a steady, unassuming luminescence. The spectral words lingered in his mind like a benediction and a warning. "Welcome home, James." Evelyn, who had watched with wide, anxious eyes, stepped forward. "James, are you all right?" Her voice was a fragile tether to the world they both knew, a world that now felt irrevocably altered by what had transpired. Mercer slowly lowered his hand, his breathing ragged yet steady. I'm here," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I faced it, all of it. I saw the shadows of my past and the echoes of what this place once was. And I realized that I can't run from it any longer." A profound stillness settled between them as Mercer grappled with the enormity of his encounter. The encounter in the vortex had unearthed truths buried deep within him. Truths about his lineage, his guilt, and the inextricable link between his fate and the ancient forces at work. He felt both diminished and strangely empowered, as if by acknowledging the darkness, he had taken the first step toward mastering it. Outside, the relentless rain continued its steady cadence against the church's weathered stone, a constant reminder of time's inexorable flow. Inside, Mercer's resolve hardened. The encounter had not provided all the answers, but it had revealed a path forward, a path that would force him to confront not only the remnants of a long-dead cult, but also the personal demons that had haunted him for years. With Evelyn's reassuring hand on his shoulder, Mercer turned away from the altar. "We have more to do," he said softly. "There are more secrets hidden in these walls and in my past. We need to uncover them before this darkness finds us all." As they retraced their steps through the silent corridors of the ancient church, every echo of their footsteps seemed to carry the promise of revelation and the lingering threat of what was yet to come. Mercer's confrontation with the void had been both a reckoning and a rebirth, and with each measured step, he resolved to follow the tangled threads of fate deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten rituals and enduring guilt. The night, heavy with the scent of rain and ancient stone, bore witness to his quiet vow, a vow to stand firm in the face of the encroaching darkness, to forge meaning out of the chaos of his memories, and to ultimately determine whether he would be consumed by the past or rise above it. The oppressive quiet of the ancient church pressed in around Mercer and Evelyn as they emerged from the altar room. The confrontation with the vortex had shaken Mercer to his core, leaving him raw and exposed to truths he had long denied. Now, with the spectral echoes of his past reverberating in his mind, he felt the heavy responsibility of the revelations and the uncertain promise of what might still come. They made their way slowly through a side corridor bathed in the pale glow of a fractured stained glass window. Every step along the worn flagstones echoed in a silence that was as much a part of the building as its crumbling walls. The air was cool and laden with the scent of damp earth and faded incense, and it seemed to vibrate with an energy that neither time nor decay could entirely subdue. For Mercer, each moment was a test. His encounter with the vortex had not only unearthed memories of long-suppressed guilt and regret, but had also shown him that the darkness he had feared might, in some strange way, be an integral part of his identity, a duality he could neither reject nor fully embrace. As he walked, the images of cloaked figures and ancient rituals mingled with the echo of that voice, a soft, almost maternal whisper of both welcome and warning. "Welcome home, James." Evelyn broke the silence. "We got the map, we got the clues, but there's something else," she said, her tone cautious as she studied Mercer's troubled face. "Something in your eyes, a vulnerability, perhaps a secret connection that you haven't yet shared. I know you're reluctant to face it, but if we're to move forward, we have to understand what ties you to all of this." Mercer paused beneath the shattered light of the stained glass. In that moment, The colors, reds, blues, and greens, danced like fleeting memories along his features. He sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of many unspoken years. "I never thought that my past would come back to haunt me in such a vivid way," he admitted softly. "All my life, I've tried to outrun these shadows, burying them under duty and routine. But tonight, I've seen that I'm inextricably bound to them. It's as if the sins of those who came before, and perhaps even my own, are etched into my very soul." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Then we need to find closure." The archivist mentioned that the ancient texts speak of a guardian, a person marked by destiny who can either seal or open the gateway between worlds. If that is you, James, then the final act of this ritual isn't just about the cult or the symbols. It's about you choosing your own fate. Her words lingered in the charged air as they continued toward a narrow doorway at the far end of the corridor. The door, constructed of heavy wood and reinforced with iron bands, led to a small antechamber that had once served as a sacristy. Here, faded murals of celestial beings and sacred geometry adorned the walls. Mercer paused at the threshold, his hand on the cool metal of the doorknob, as if seeking permission to step further into his destiny. Inside the sacristy, time seemed to hold its breath. Dust motes floated in the gentle beam of a solitary window, and the silence was so deep it roared in Mercer's ears. In the center of the room, an ancient stone basin was arranged atop a low altar, surrounded by a ring of extinguished candles. The setup was deliberate, a stage set for a final confrontation with the dark forces that had haunted him for so long. Mercer's thoughts turned inward as he slowly approached the basin. Each step was a measured act of defiance against the pull of the unknown, a determination to reclaim the narrative of his own life. The basin was empty now, yet he sensed that it was waiting for a final sacrifice or perhaps for a confession. It was as if the basin itself had been a receptacle for the energies of every ritual that had ever taken place in this forsaken place. Evelyn's voice broke the stillness once more. "James, if you believe that confronting these echoes can help you find redemption, then let your truth be known. Sometimes, to close a door, you must first open it and invite the past to speak its final word." With a deep, steadying breath, Mercer knelt before the basin. He took from his pocket a small, worn object, a locket that had belonged to his mother, the only tangible remnant of a time before the weight of duty and guilt had consumed him. His hand trembled as he placed the locket in the basin. In that simple, symbolic act, he laid bare the burden of his history, the sorrow, the regret, and the desire for absolution. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, as if stirred by his offering, the basin began to glow faintly, a soft, golden light that spread in gentle ripples across the stone surface. The glow intensified until it bathed the sacristy in a warm radiance that belied the darkness that had preceded it. In that light, Mercer felt a shift, a subtle, yet profound release of the tension that had long held him captive. It was as though the locket's sacrifice had served as an invitation for the past to surrender its grip, for the chains of guilt and regret to break apart. As the light reached its zenith, the room filled with a quiet chorus, voices that were not threatening, but rather sorrowful and understanding. They spoke in murmurs, their words too soft to discern clearly, yet they carried the unmistakable promise of forgiveness and closure. Slowly, the glow receded, and the basin returned to its dormant state. Mercer sat back, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Had he truly set something free? Or had he merely shifted the balance between darkness and light, leaving the mysteries unresolved for another day? Evelyn knelt beside him, her eyes reflecting the lingering glow. "Sometimes, redemption isn't a single moment of triumph," she said gently. "It's a series of choices, a continuous act of confronting our demons, however daunting they may be." Mercer nodded, absorbing her words. He understood that tonight's encounter was but one step on a long, arduous journey, a journey of self-discovery and the relentless search for meaning amid chaos. The ancient forces that had been awakened would not simply vanish. They would continue to echo in the corners of his mind, in the quiet moments between his waking thoughts and his dreams. As Mercer rose to leave the sacristy, the sound of distant thunder rumbled through the building, a reminder that the storm outside was far from over. In the corridor beyond, the ancient church waited, its walls echoing with secrets that time could neither erase nor fully reveal. Mercer took one last look at the altar room, the symbols now dim, the air heavy with unspoken promises, and stepped back into the night. Outside, the rain had lessened to a steady patter, as if nature itself acknowledged that a small measure of balance had been restored. The city loomed ahead, vast and indifferent. Yet for Mercer, every shadow now held a hint of light, a promise that even in the darkest moments, there was a path toward redemption. Walking side by side with Evelyn, Mercer allowed himself a brief smile, a fragile expression of hope mingled with the resolve to continue his journey. The echoes of the past, the weight of ancient rituals, and the burden of personal guilt would linger, but now they were tempered by the knowledge that every ending was also a beginning. In that delicate interplay between redemption and regret, Mercer stepped forward into the rain-washed night, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that while the darkness might never vanish entirely, it could be met with courage, understanding, and the enduring light of one's own truth. Dawn crept over the city like a hesitant promise, its light soft and diffused through lingering patches of mist. The storm's fury had subsided into a gentle drizzle that glossed the pavement and washed the night's secrets into the gutters. Mercer stood at the window of his apartment, watching as the first rays of sunrise illuminated familiar streets, now transformed by the events of the previous night. The memory of the ancient church, the echo of rituals and the spectral voice, remained vivid, a permanent imprint on his soul. Yet as the horizon brightened, there was a quiet resolve in his gaze. Leaving behind the shattered sanctuary of the church, Mercer and Evelyn had returned to the city with heavy hearts but clearer minds. Their footsteps along rain-washed sidewalks had been measured and silent, as if each step carried the weight of revelations that could not easily be. Unlearned, now, in the gentle light of morning, Mercer felt both the lingering chill of the night's encounters and the tentative warmth of a new beginning. Walking the familiar route to his car, Mercer couldn't help but notice subtle changes in the cityscape. The once menacing shadows of alleyways now appeared softened by daylight, yet in their recesses, hints of forgotten secrets still stirred. A stray newspaper headline mentioned an unusual residue found at another crime scene, a detail that made Mercer's skin prickle. The darkness, he realized, was not something that could ever be wholly vanquished. It merely retreated until the right moment for its return. At a small, nearly deserted coffee shop near the precinct, Mercer found a quiet corner and settled with a cup of black coffee that was as bitter as his reflections. The morning paper lay forgotten on the table as he allowed his thoughts to wander over the labyrinth of the previous night's events. His mind replayed the spectral encounter at the altar, the moment his hand had brushed the vortex, and that faint, echoing greeting, "Welcome home, James," which now seemed less like a threat and more like an acknowledgement of his place within an unending cycle of light and darkness. Evelyn joined him a little later, her presence a steady anchor amid the uncertain dawn. Over muted conversation and the clink of ceramic cups, she and Mercer discussed what they had witnessed and what it might portend for the future. There was talk of lingering mysteries, the cult's legacy, the ancient texts, and the possibility that Mercer himself was a crucial piece in a puzzle that stretched far beyond the boundaries of his past cases. Evelyn's eyes, usually so sure and analytical, now held a glimmer of something akin to hope. "James," she said softly, "I know last night was terrifying, but I also saw something in you, a strength you didn't even know you had. The way you faced that void. It wasn't just about confronting the past. It was about accepting every piece of yourself, even the darkness." Her words, simple and honest, resonated deeply. Mercer knew that his journey was far from over. In that moment of quiet camaraderie, He began to see the future not as an endless corridor of dread, but as an uncertain horizon, full of both shadows and light. The remnants of guilt and regret were part of him, yes, but so too was the resolve to shape his destiny. After a few moments of reflective silence, Mercer rose from his seat. Stepping back into the soft morning light, he made his way to the parking lot. The air was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the church. As he climbed into his car, the hum of the engine mingled with his thoughts about the delicate balance between redemption and the inexorable pull of ancient forces. The events of the night had left scars, but they had also sparked a renewal within him, a readiness to face whatever might come next. Driving through streets still slick with the memory of rain, Mercer passed by old brick buildings and modern storefronts, each one a testament to the resilience of a city that had seen both decay and rebirth. His mind drifted to the archivist's somber warning that the past never truly dies, but rather waits for the opportune moment to resurface. Yet now, with each familiar landmark glistening in the early light, Mercer felt a subtle shift, a realization that while the echoes of that ancient ritual would always be a part of him, they did not have to dictate his every choice. At the precinct, the morning bustle had begun to stir. Colleagues offered brief, concerned greetings, their eyes reflecting the fatigue of a long night. Mercer's report from the church was already circulating, a mix of hard evidence and cryptic testimony that would surely stir debates among those who believed in the rational and the unexplainable alike. Yet in the midst of procedural details and forensic jargon, Mercer's own narrative lay hidden. The personal odyssey that had led him to embrace his own complexity, the intertwining of guilt, destiny, and the courage to confront the unknown. Later that day, as Mercer sat in his modest office reviewing case files with a renewed clarity, he found himself pausing at the edge of a photograph, a faded image of the abandoned church, taken on a rainy night not unlike the one they had just left behind. The church's broken spires and ivy-clad walls looked less menacing in the photograph's soft focus, and Mercer allowed himself a small, contemplative smile. It was a reminder that even in decay and darkness, there could be beauty, renewal, and the promise of a new beginning. In the quiet hum of the precinct, as the day wore on and the initial shock of the night's events began to settle, Mercer realized that his journey was evolving. The ritual he had confronted was but one chapter in a larger, ongoing story, a narrative that intertwined the ancient and the modern, the supernatural and the everyday. The darkness, while still present, had lost some of its terror. Instead, it now symbolized the depth of human experience, the capacity for regret, the struggle for redemption, and the enduring hope that every shadow might one day give way to light. Standing at the window of his office, Mercer gazed out at the city. The horizon, once shrouded in ominous fog, now offered a glimpse of blue, a promise that the future was unwritten. Though the past would always echo in his memory, he understood that every day was a chance to forge a new path. And so, with a steady resolve and a heart tempered by both regret and newfound hope, he stepped into the day. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the city in gentle warmth, Mercer's thoughts echoed quietly with the truth that had been forged in the depths of darkness, that redemption was not a final destination, but an ongoing journey, a series of choices made in the face of uncertainty. The unseen horizon beckoned, mysterious and uncharted, inviting him to explore further, to learn more, and to face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and an unwavering commitment to his own truth. In that delicate interplay of past and future, Mercer knew that while the echoes of ancient rituals might never be silenced entirely, their power could be harnessed for a purpose greater than fear, a purpose rooted in the enduring strength of the human spirit. And so, as the day unfolded in a tapestry of light and shadow, the detective resolved to meet the future head-on, ready to embrace both the mysteries and the miracles that lay hidden just beyond the unseen horizon. Dusk settled over the city once more, painting the sky with bruised purples and muted blues as Mercer stepped out of the precinct. though the revelations of the past nights still hummed in his veins. The dawn's fragile hope had given way to a renewed determination. The events at the church and in the quiet intimacy of that sacristy had changed him. The echoes of ancient rituals and personal reckonings had left scars, but also a spark. Now, as twilight deepened, he felt that the journey was far from over. The streets, slick with the evening's light and the remnants of rain, pulsed with a quiet urgency. Mercer moved with a measured pace, his eyes alert for any sign that the delicate balance between the seen and unseen might be shifting again. Every corner of the city now seemed charged with possibilities, every shadow a potential harbor for secrets yet to be revealed. In his pocket, the locket, now empty of its old sorrow, but filled with the promise of a new beginning, rested like a silent talisman. At a narrow intersection where neon and dusk danced together, Mercer's phone vibrated with an unexpected urgency. Glancing at the screen, he saw a number he didn't recognize. With a cautious curiosity that had become second nature, he answered. "Detective Mercer," he said, his tone steady yet laced with weariness. A soft, almost imperceptible static filled the line before a voice emerged, low, measured, and carrying an unmistakable accent of antiquity. "I know what you've been through," the voice whispered, as if speaking directly into the recesses of Mercer's soul. "The path you've chosen is just beginning. There are others who remember, others who wait in the shadows for the moment to come forth. Be vigilant." Before Mercer could probe further, the line went dead, leaving him with a lingering sense of both forewarning and fascination. The message was cryptic, yet it resonated with everything he had experienced in the church and in the quiet moments of introspection that followed. The notion that hidden forces, long dormant and patient, were stirring once again sent a shiver through him. Mercer's mind raced as he walked the rain-slicked sidewalks back toward his car. The phone call was a reminder that the ancient legacy, the cult's lingering influence, and the unresolved rituals had not been laid to rest with the glow of the sacristy's basin. Instead, it was unfolding along a path as unpredictable as the shifting tides of memory and fate. In that moment, every step he took was imbued with the urgency of a destiny that refused to be quieted. Inside the car, as he drove through the city's neon-lit arteries, Mercer recalled the archivist's somber warnings and the spectral echoes of his own voice at the altar. The past, with its mix of guilt and grace, had been both a burden and a teacher. And while he had tasted a measure of redemption by confronting his memories, the mysterious call was a clear signal. The darkness was gathering anew, and its purpose was yet to be fully understood. At a familiar diner, a small refuge from the city's relentless pace, Mercer met Evelyn, who was already seated in a booth by the window. Her eyes, ever perceptive, quickly took in the subtle tension that had replaced his usual guarded calm. Over a steaming cup of coffee, they spoke in hushed tones about the call, the old texts, and the possibility that a new thread in the ancient tapestry had just been pulled loose. "James," Evelyn said, her voice a blend of concern and determination. "I've been cross-referencing some of the old manuscripts and local folklore, and there's mention of a covenant, a new ritual that, if unimpeded, could reopen the portal we nearly witnessed last night. We need to act quickly before the balance tips further into darkness." Mercer nodded, the lines on his face deepening with resolve. "I've seen the past grip on me, and I know it can claim us all if we're not careful. We have a duty, not just to solve these mysteries, but to guard against the reckoning they herald." Their conversation was punctuated by the low murmur of other patrons and the soft clink of dishes, a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned beneath their calm exteriors. They resolved to reconvene at the precinct in an hour, where Evelyn would present her findings, and together they would chart a course forward. Before parting, Mercer stepped outside for a moment, pausing in the cool night air as he looked upward. The stars were veiled by lingering clouds, and the city's distant hum seemed to echo with unspoken promises and hidden dangers. The enigmatic phone call had reignited a fire, a burning need to confront not only the legacy of a long-dead cult, but also the personal demons that had both haunted and defined him. as he walked back to join Evelyn. Mercer felt that the journey ahead was an unfolding path, unpredictable and fraught with peril. Yet with every step, he carried the lessons of the past and the hope for redemption that the fragile dawn had once promised. The unseen horizon beckoned, its mysteries as boundless as the night sky above. And in that quiet resolve, as the city whispered secrets and the ancient forces stirred once more in the depths of memory, Mercer embraced the truth that his destiny was not a final destination, but an ever-unfolding journey, one that demanded courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to light in the midst of encroaching shadows. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, Mercer smiled at the thought of it. For in the delicate interplay of fate and free will, he had discovered that even the deepest darkness could be met with the steadfast glow of a single, determined soul. Later that evening, as twilight deepened into an inky night, Mercer and Evelyn reconvened in a quiet conference room at the precinct. The room was dimly lit by a single overhead lamp, its glow casting long, uncertain shadows across stacks of case files and battered notebooks. Between them lay a freshly acquired manuscript, its pages yellowed with age and written in a script that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly cadence. This was the document Evelyn had uncovered after her late-night research, a fragment of lore that spoke ominously of a new covenant, a ritual that promised to bridge the gap between worlds once more. Mercer turned the fragile pages slowly, his fingers trembling as they caressed the faded ink. The text detailed a gathering of those who still worshipped the ancient forces, a secret society determined to renew an age-old pact with the powers beyond. According to the manuscript, the new covenant was to be enacted on a night when the stars aligned in a pattern unseen for centuries, a celestial configuration that would render the veil between the mortal and the unknown perilously thin. Evelyn's eyes, bright with both determination and a trace of worry, met Mercer's. "This isn't just another ritual," she murmured. "It's a call to arms, a gathering of individuals who believe that by completing this ceremony, they can harness an ancient force that has lain dormant for too long." Mercer's gaze hardened. The voice from the phone, the spectral greetings, the visions in the vortex, they all pointed to this moment. "They're planning to reopen the portal," he said quietly, the memory of that disembodied whisper echoing in his mind. "I know what you've been through. Be vigilant. And if that happens, it won't just be our past resurfacing. It will be a new beginning for a power that could reshape everything." The manuscript described the precise conditions required for the ritual. A secluded, ruined chapel on the outskirts of the city, similar in desolation to the church they had already explored, but one that held additional cryptic symbols only visible under the light of a rare astral event. It named a time, a specific night in the coming weeks, when the celestial bodies would align to create the perfect storm of cosmic energy. Mercer and Evelyn exchanged a long, determined look. They both knew that if the covenant were to be completed, it could unleash forces beyond control. The detective's personal connection to the cult's ancient prophecy, the burden of being the potential guardian, suddenly felt even heavier. He recalled the spectral figure's words in the vortex, the notion that he was bound by destiny to either seal the gateway or allow it to open. Now, faced with the prospect of a renewed ritual, that destiny was pressing in on him more urgently than ever. Over the next several hours, the two meticulously mapped out their next steps. They cross-referenced the manuscript's descriptions with archival records, piecing together clues from long-forgotten texts and whispered oral histories. Evelyn's research led them to a reclusive historian who had once been a colleague of the archivist. In a cramped, book-lined study deep within the city's oldest quarter, the historian, an elderly man with eyes that shone like polished onyx, confirmed what the manuscript had hinted at. "The new covenant is not merely a symbolic gesture," the historian intoned, his voice low and measured as he leaned over a fragile map marked with ancient symbols. "It is a deliberate act to call forth an entity that lies beyond our mortal ken. For generations, the cult's remnants have waited for this alignment. They believe that only through the ritual can they harness the power that, in ages past, was both revered and feared. He paused, studying Mercer as if reading the lines of a destiny written on his face. Your involvement, Detective Mercer, is no coincidence. Some believe that you are the key, a guardian prophesied to either fortify the barrier or permit the forces to break through. The texts speak of a burden borne by one whose soul is marked by both sorrow and strength. Mercer felt a chill as the words sunk in. The historian's confirmation tied together the disparate threads of his experiences, the spectral encounters, the mysterious phone call, and the overwhelming sense of inevitability. There was no escaping this legacy. The ancient pact was to be renewed, and he was inextricably linked to its fulfillment. Armed with these grim revelations, Mercer and Evelyn decided to stake out the location indicated by the historian, a derelict chapel on the city's edge, hidden amidst overgrown foliage and the ruins of industrial decay. They planned to surveil the site, gather any evidence of clandestine activity, and if necessary, confront those who sought to complete the covenant. Night descended once more, heavy and impenetrable. Mercer's car cut through the darkness as he drove toward the outskirts, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The weight of destiny pressed upon him with every mile, and the thought of facing a gathering of zealots, people so consumed by the desire to reopen the gateway to an ancient, unknowable power, filled him with a fierce resolve. Evelyn sat in silence beside him, her steady presence a source of comfort and clarity amid the swirling uncertainty. "James," she said quietly as they neared their destination, "whatever happens tonight, we do this together. You're not alone in this fight." Mercer offered a small, grateful smile. "I know, Evelyn, and that makes all the difference." Arriving at the chapel, they parked a safe distance away. The building loomed before them, a crumbling edifice cloaked in ivy and shadow, its broken windows resembling hollow eyes that watched their every move. Mercer's pulse quickened as he recalled every detail from the manuscript and the historian's words. Tonight, under the guise of darkness, the covenant would be attempted, and he would be there, a reluctant guardian standing at the crossroads of destiny and free will. Silently, they set up their surveillance equipment in a concealed spot behind a tangle of trees and rusted fences. The air was thick with anticipation, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mercer's eyes scanned the chapel's facade, alert for any sign of movement. A flicker of candlelight, a shadow slipping along the wall, the murmur of incantations in a language long dead. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited. Finally, faint sounds of chanting emerged from within the chapel, carried on the wind like ghostly fragments of ancient hymnals. Mercer's heart hammered in his chest. The ritual had begun. He and Evelyn exchanged a determined glance before slipping into the darkness, moving silently toward the chapel's entrance. Every step was measured, every breath deliberate, as if the night itself were conspiring to hold them in suspense. The fate of countless souls, and perhaps the very fabric of the world, rested on what would unfold in the coming hours. Inside the chapel, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable energy. Flickering candles, arranged in a rough circle on the cold stone floor, cast wavering shadows on the walls. At the center of the circle, a group of robed figures chanted in unison, their voices merging into a single, haunting cadence. In the midst of them stood a figure whose presence was both commanding and enigmatic, eyes glinting with an almost feral intensity. Mercer's breath caught as he watched from the shadows, the full import of the situation crystallizing in that moment. The new covenant was underway, and he, bound by fate and burdened by his own past, was poised to play a role that would forever alter the balance between darkness and light. As the chanting rose to a crescendo, Mercer felt the weight of his destiny tighten around him like a vice. He knew that the coming confrontation would test him in ways he had never imagined, forcing him to confront not only the external forces of an ancient cult but the deepest recesses of his own soul. And yet, in that critical moment, he resolved to meet the challenge head-on. The unseen horizon beckoned, and as the first notes of a new, ominous refrain filled the chapel, Mercer stepped from the shadows, ready to face the new covenant, to stand as the guardian between two worlds, and to carve his own destiny in the space where ancient lore and modern resolve intertwined. The chill of the midnight air seeped into every crack of the ancient chapel as Mercer and Evelyn took their positions at the periphery of the ritual circle. The murmurs of the robed congregation swelled into a forbidding cadence, a hypnotic litany that echoed against stone walls steeped in centuries of secret lore. Flickering candlelight danced upon faces hidden behind dark hoods, and in the center, the cult leader stood elevated on a makeshift dais. His eyes, burning with fanatical fervor, swept over the gathered acolytes as if heralding the arrival of an epic-defining moment. For a long, charged minute, the chapel was suspended in time. Mercer's pulse thundered in his ears as he steadied himself, feeling both the pull of destiny and the heavy burden of his own past. He recalled the voice that had whispered on the phone, a voice that seemed to warn and beckon him simultaneously. Now, facing the tangible manifestation of that ominous promise, he knew that his moment had come. With Evelyn's silent nod of reassurance, Mercer stepped from the shadowed recesses into the dim circle of candlelight. Every step he took was weighted with determination, echoing the countless nights he had spent haunted by specters of memory and regret. The chanting faltered, a ripple of uncertainty passing through the assembled cultists as their eyes turned toward him. The leader's voice, low and sonorous, broke the uneasy silence. The hour approaches. The covenant shall be sealed, and the portal shall open. His words dripped with the promise of power and menace. You, the prophesied guardian, have long been hidden in the darkness. Now, reveal yourself and claim your destiny. Mercer's throat tightened as he advanced, his gaze locked on the leader. He could feel the oppressive weight of ancestral guilt and a fierce, unyielding resolve stirring within him. Though fear clawed at the edges of his mind, he raised his chin, letting his presence speak of an inner strength born from years of relentless pursuit of truth. Your destiny is not mine to command, Mercer said, his voice steady despite the maelstrom within. I have borne the weight of my past long enough. I choose now to stand for what is right, and to protect this world from forces that would see it undone. A collective murmur arose from the robed figures. The leader's eyes narrowed, and the incantations resumed, their tone shifting from celebratory to wrathful. As the cultists moved in unison, their arms raised in a ritualistic gesture, Evelyn stepped forward to flank Mercer, her presence a steadfast beacon of reason in a gathering overtaken by fanaticism. In that critical moment, the energy in the chapel shifted palpably. The meticulously arranged circle of candles flared suddenly, casting erratic shadows that leapt across ancient stone. The air vibrated with the raw power of unleashed intent, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse in tandem with the rising cadence of the cult's incantation. Mercer's hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching into the recesses of his memory for the words that might counteract the dark ritual. The ancient manuscript, the one describing the guardian's role, echoed in his mind. He recalled the sacred verses, half forgotten yet insistent, that spoke of balance and the sealing of breaches between worlds. With a clarity born of desperation and resolve, he began to speak, his voice low and resonant, weaving the incantation with every ounce of determination he possessed. The cult leader's eyes widened, and the chanting faltered as an otherworldly wind stirred within the chapel. The candles' flames flickered wildly, their light caught in the interplay of ancient power and defiant human spirit. A fierce energy gathered around Mercer, a counterforce that seemed to push back against the tide of dark invocations. The robed acolytes recoiled, their unified fervor splintering into murmurs of disbelief and dread. By the light of those who came before and the strength of those who walk in the dawn, Mercer intoned, his voice rising above the clamor. I renounce the darkness that binds you. I reclaim the legacy of my own soul, and I seal the breach that you would force open." The words, heavy with promise and defiance, reverberated off the ancient walls. The vortex of power, which had begun to swell at the heart of the cult's circle, shuddered violently. Its edges blurred and wavered as if uncertain, caught between the seductive pull of forbidden force and the firm, resolute barrier Mercer was creating. The cult leader roared in fury, lunging forward with outstretched hands, but his advance was met by a shockwave of luminous energy that sent him staggering back. For a heartbeat, time seemed to shatter, every element in the room caught in a tumultuous struggle between the ancient darkness and the flickering light of redemption. Mercer felt as though he were suspended on the knife's edge of fate, every fiber of his being alight with the struggle between his own inner demons and the hope that had been forged in the crucible of his past experiences. Evelyn, standing steadfast by his side, scanned the faces of the faltering cultists. Their eyes were no longer alight with fanatical promise, but flickered with doubt and terror. The energy that had once been orchestrated with such precise malevolence now disintegrated into chaotic sparks, swirling into nothingness as the protective incantation took hold. With one final, resounding verse, Mercer completed the ancient prayer. The vortex at the center of the circle convulsed, and then, with an almost audible sigh, began to collapse in upon itself. A low hum filled the chamber, a sound of finality, as if the very fabric of reality was reasserting its boundaries. The dark energy that had threatened to upend the delicate balance receded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound, almost sacred stillness. In the aftermath, silence reigned. The cult leader crumpled to the stone floor, his eyes vacant and devoid of the malignant fire that had animated them moments before. The remaining acolytes scattered, their chants dying in fearful whispers as they fled into the night. Mercer and Evelyn stood together amid the dissipating echoes of an ancient covenant, a testament to the strength of human resolve in the face of insurmountable darkness. For a long moment, Mercer allowed himself to simply breathe in the charged air of the now quiet chapel. The journey had not been without its cost. Scars would remain, both visible and hidden deep within his soul. But tonight, he had reclaimed a measure of control over the legacy that had haunted him for so long. Evelyn reached out, grasping his hand in silent solidarity. "You did it, James," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief and admiration. "You sealed it, if only for now." Mercer offered a tired, bittersweet smile. "It's not over," he replied softly, glancing around the ruined sanctuary as if sensing that deeper mysteries still lay hidden in its shadowed corners. "But tonight, we've taken back a piece of our future." Outside, as the first light of dawn crept along the horizon once again, the world seemed to exhale, a collective breath of relief intermingled with the promise of new beginnings. The covenant had been broken, the portal sealed, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Mercer sensed that the path ahead might just lead to healing instead of further darkness. In the quiet after the storm, as the city stirred to life and hope replaced fear, Mercer stepped forward into the uncertain light of day. The echoes of ancient rituals and the burdens of his past would linger, but now they were tempered by the knowledge that even the deepest abyss could be confronted, and perhaps, in time, transcended by the indomitable spirit of those who dare to stand against it. The first light of dawn crept hesitantly over the horizon, washing the city in soft hues of gold and rose as Mercer and Evelyn emerged from the shattered remnants of the chapel. Though the brutal confrontation had ended the ritual that night, the echoes of its power still reverberated. In the air, a reminder that even the severed ties of ancient pacts leave behind their indelible mark. In the aftermath, the once oppressive atmosphere of the chapel had given way to a fragile calm. The cultists had scattered into the night, leaving behind discarded robes and scattered relics of their failed ceremony. Mercer and Evelyn gathered what evidence they could from the silent sanctuary, a handful of hastily scrawled notes, a torn piece of ceremonial fabric, and the lingering scent of burnt incense that clung to the stone walls. Later, back at the precinct, Mercer sat in his office with a heavy silence as his colleagues discussed the night's events in hushed tones. For him, the night's confrontation was not merely a battle against an external darkness, but a deeply personal reckoning with the legacy of his own past. The spectral whisper, "Welcome home, James," had echoed in his ears even after the portal had closed, a persistent reminder that his destiny was inexorably intertwined with the forces he had just defied. Evelyn entered the room with a small stack of documents and photographs, her eyes reflecting a mix of relief and renewed determination. "We've recovered a few items from the chapel," she said softly, setting the evidence on Mercer's desk. "They might help us piece together exactly what our adversaries were planning, and if there's any part of the ritual left unfulfilled." Mercer nodded, his gaze lingering on a black and white photograph of the ruined altar, its surface still faintly marked by the residue of unholy energies. It looks like they were expecting more, a final act to ensure the covenant was renewed completely. "We stopped them, but I can't shake the feeling that remnants of that power still linger. The forces we encountered tonight might not be fully vanquished." Over the course of the next several days, Mercer and Evelyn pored over every scrap of evidence. They revisited archival records and consulted with the reclusive historian, whose grim countenance deepened as he listened to their account. "Ancient pacts are not easily broken," the historian warned in a low, gravelly tone. "Even when a ritual is disrupted, the energies summoned often have a way of seeking new vessels or waiting for the right moment to reassert themselves." As if in confirmation of his words, small anomalies began to appear around the city. Shadows moved against the flow of daylight, and there were whispers in alleys where the wind carried voices in languages long forgotten. At first, these signs were dismissed as mere coincidences, oddities in a city that had seen its share of mystery and decay. But Mercer knew better. Every inexplicable tremor of energy, every inexplicable chill, was a reminder that the Covenant's remnants still pulsed beneath the surface of everyday life. One late afternoon, while combing through a trove of ancient manuscripts and precincts, Mercer discovered a faded illustration depicting a similar ritual, one in which the Guardian's role was both to seal and to monitor the breach between worlds. The image was unsettlingly familiar, its lines and symbols echoing those he had encountered in the chapel. It suggested that his destiny was not a closed chapter, but an ongoing vigil, a perpetual balancing act between the forces of darkness and the fragile light of humanity. Haunted by these revelations, Mercer took a solitary walk along a quiet stretch of urban waterfront, the river's surface reflecting the twilight sky. The air was crisp and tinged with the scent of coming rain. In that solitude, he allowed himself a moment of introspection. The confrontation at the chapel had forced him to face not only a cult's fanaticism, but the deep-seated guilt and sorrow that had long defined his inner world. Now, he recognized that the remnants of the Covenant were as much a part of him as they were of the ancient forces he had fought. Evelyn's steady presence remained his anchor in these turbulent times. Over cups of lukewarm coffee in a quiet diner, she reassured him, "James, you've done something remarkable. You've turned the tide, if only for now. But this isn't the end. We need to stay vigilant. There's still work to be done, and I believe we're just beginning to understand the full scope of what we've encountered." Mercer listened, absorbing her words like a balm for his weary soul. He realized that while the ritual had been halted, the struggle between light and darkness was an eternal one, an unseen horizon that beckoned him to continue the fight, to seek out the lingering shadows and ensure they never fully reclaimed their hold on the world. In the coming weeks, as the city settled back into its routine and the memory of the night's terror slowly faded into urban legend, Mercer took up the mantle of Guardian with renewed resolve. He worked alongside Evelyn and a small team of trusted colleagues, monitoring subtle disturbances, tracing whispered rumors of cult activity, and deepening his understanding of the ancient texts that had once forewarned of such events. Though the scars of that fateful night would remain etched in his soul, Mercer now embraced them as part of the intricate tapestry of his life. a constant reminder of the delicate balance between redemption and regret. With every case he pursued and every mystery he unraveled, he carried forward the legacy of a guardian committed to protecting not just the city, but the fragile hope that light could prevail over darkness. And so, as twilight gave way to dawn once more, Mercer stood by a rain-washed window in his modest office, gazing out at the city that had both tested and transformed him. The unseen horizon stretched before him, a path fraught with uncertainty and danger, yet illuminated by the promise of new beginnings. With determination in his eyes and Evelyn by his side, he whispered to the quiet morning, "I will not let the darkness win." In that moment, as the city awoke to the gentle hum of life and possibility, Mercer understood that every ending was simply the start of another chapter, a testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit and the eternal dance between shadows and light. The continuous fight against the shadows. For once, he fully grasped that the journey ahead was not just his own. It was a shared struggle, one that intertwined the past, present, and future in a delicate dance of light and darkness. His resolve was unshakable. The remnants of the Covenant might whisper from the depths, waiting for the right moment to reclaim their power, but Mercer knew now that he was prepared. Not just to confront the unknown, but to trust in his own capacity to resist it. For both him and the city, the horizon was as uncharted as the mysteries of his own heart. Yet in embracing the fight, in accepting the inevitable dance with shadows, Mercer had discovered a deeper truth. There was no final victory against the dark, but each battle, every small triumph, shone a light that would stretch across the vast, unseen horizon in ways he had never imagined. And so, as night descended yet again upon the city, he walked forward, quietly resolved to face whatever would come, and to never stop fighting. The early morning light was tentative, filtering through thin clouds as if unsure whether to reveal the city's secrets. Mercer awoke before dawn, a restless energy pulsing beneath his skin, a subtle reminder that even as the Covenant's overt rituals had been halted, its remnants still whispered in the quiet spaces of his life. Sitting at the edge of his narrow bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying the night's events, the spectral words, the fierce counterincantation, and that final, resolute vow. Yet even now, in the fragile calm of a new day, he could not shake the feeling that the darkness was merely lying in wait. A soft chime from his phone broke the silence. Mercer picked it up, his eyes scanning a terse, cryptic message. Not all is sealed. Look to where shadows gather in the light. The sender was unknown, the tone both cautionary and foreboding. His pulse quickened, a silent alarm that the balance he had fought so hard to restore was under threat of being disturbed once again. By mid-morning, Mercer found himself in a cramped conference room at the precinct. The room was lit by the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, in stark contrast to the twilight mysteries he had just endured. Across the table, Evelyn sat with a stack of documents and a tablet displaying satellite images of the city. Her eyes, determined and earnest, met Mercer's as she began to speak. "James, there have been reports, small, scattered incidents, but enough to make them significant," she explained, her voice low and measured. A series of graffiti markings in abandoned buildings, inexplicable cold spots in otherwise bustling neighborhoods, even brief, ghost-like apparitions caught on surveillance near industrial areas. They bear an uncanny resemblance to the symbols we saw at the chapel. Mercer leaned forward, studying the images on the tablet. In each picture, there was a motif, a spiral intersected by angular lines, echoing the ancient glyphs they had encountered. It's as if the energy we contained last time is seeping out, reasserting itself in subtle ways, he said, a note of grim resolve in his tone. The Covenant may have been disrupted, but its echoes linger. We might have only postponed the next act. Evelyn nodded. I'd cross-referenced the locations with old maps and city records. Many of these sites are near forgotten industrial complexes or derelict residential blocks, places where the modern world has built over the past without erasing its hidden scars. She paused, tapping a location on the screen. This one in particular stands out. It's an abandoned textile mill on the edge of the old quarter. Witnesses reported feeling an overwhelming chill and hearing distant, rhythmic chanting on the night of last Friday. Mercer's gaze hardened. We need to investigate this before it spirals out of control. If these phenomena are the remnants of the Covenant, then whoever or whatever is behind them might be trying to complete the ritual in a different form. A long silence settled between them as the implications of his words took root. Outside, the city hummed with the muted activity of an ordinary day, oblivious to the undercurrents of ancient power that stirred in its forgotten corners. Mercer felt the familiar weight of duty pressing upon him. He was no longer merely a detective chasing routine crimes. He had become a reluctant guardian of a secret that spanned centuries. Later that afternoon, Mercer and Evelyn drove toward the abandoned textile mill. The route took them along twisting back roads where the modern city gave way to neglected relics of a bygone era. The mill loomed in the distance, a hulking, dilapidated structure choked by ivy and the passage of time. Its broken windows and rusted metal framed a silhouette that was both haunting and melancholic. They parked at a safe distance and approached on foot, their footsteps muffled by a layer of fallen leaves and urban decay. The air was thick with humidity and a faint, musty odor of neglect, but beneath it lay an almost imperceptible charge, a shiver of energy that prickled the skin and quickened the heartbeat. Inside, the mill was a labyrinth of empty rooms and cavernous halls, every surface dusted with the residue of decades of abandonment. Mercer's flashlight beam danced across peeling paint and rusted machinery until it settled on a wall where, faintly illuminated by a shaft of light, a series of symbols were painted. They were the same intricate designs that had haunted him in the chapel, now crudely scrawled, yet undeniably deliberate.
Over here, Evelyn called softly, pointing to the wall. The glow of the flashlight revealed that the markings were arranged in a pattern reminiscent of a ritual circle. A low, almost inaudible hum seemed to vibrate through the air, as if the very
The glow of the flashlight revealed that the markings were arranged in a pattern reminiscent of a ritual circle. A low, almost inaudible hum seemed to vibrate through the air, as if the very building were resonating with the latent energies of an ancient rite. Mercer stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The symbols pulsed with a faint luminescence, an eerie echo of the power he had once confronted. "They're active," he whispered, more to himself than to Evelyn. "The Covenant isn't dead, it's evolving." As he reached out to touch the wall, a sudden gust of wind swept through the mill, scattering dust and sending a chill down his spine. In that moment, he was overcome by a vivid vision, fleeting images of hooded figures moving in unison, the sound of synchronized chanting, and the echo of that mysterious voice from the phone urging him to remain vigilant. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Mercer with a lingering sense of urgency and dread. "James," Evelyn said softly, breaking his reverie. "I recorded something on my phone when I first arrived." She played back a short audio clip, and the room filled with an otherworldly sound, a series of disjointed, low chants that seemed to rise from the very walls. The voices were layered, as if coming from multiple directions, and carried a resonance that defied explanation. Mercer listened intently, his mind racing. "This is a warning," he murmured. "They're trying to alert us, and maybe even to summon something. We need to document every detail and figure out who is behind this resurgence." Over the next several hours, Mercer and Evelyn meticulously collected evidence. Photographs of the symbols, audio recordings of the ambient chants, and even a few inexplicable readings from a portable electromagnetic sensor that registered unusual spikes in energy. Each piece of data painted a picture of a dormant power that was stirring in secret, seeking new avenues to manifest in the modern world. As dusk began to settle, the mill fell eerily silent once more, the only sound the soft rustling of wind through broken windows. Mercer stepped outside, his thoughts heavy with the realization that the threat was far from over. He pulled out his phone and sent a terse message to his team at the precinct. Possible reactivation of occult activity at Old Mill. Request backup and further surveillance. Remain alert. Standing alone in the fading light, Mercer looked up at the sky. The first stars were beginning to prick the twilight, and he couldn't help but feel that they too were watching, a silent audience to the unfolding drama between ancient forces and the modern world. In that moment, the detective recognized that his role as guardian was not a temporary assignment, but an ongoing battle against the unseen currents of darkness that had, for generations, sought to shape fate. The air was cool, and the quiet of the approaching night allowed Mercer a moment of introspection. He recalled the historian's somber words and the spectral warnings that had punctuated his journey thus far. Though he had sealed one breach, the Covenant's remnants still sought expression, and with every sign, they grew bolder. The mill, with its haunted symbols and lingering chants, was a stark reminder that the struggle was far from over. With resolve hardening within him, Mercer made his way back to the car. He knew that tonight, as the stars climbed higher in the darkened sky, further disturbances might be imminent. And when they did, he would be ready, armed with the knowledge of past battles, the support of those who believed in the light, and a relentless determination to protect the fragile boundary between worlds. In the quiet hum of his car engine, Mercer glanced at Evelyn, who met his gaze with a look of steely determination. Their shared silence spoke volumes. They understood that while the Covenant's remnants were subtle, their threat was real and growing. The night ahead promised further encounters with the echoes of ancient power, a silent warning that the battle for balance was only just entering its next phase. As Mercer drove away from the mill, the city's neon lights flickering in the distance like wary sentinels, he felt the weight of destiny press upon him once more. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril, but he would not falter. In the interplay of shadow and light, amidst the whisper of ancient secrets and modern resolve, Mercer vowed to stand vigilant. The unseen forces were stirring, and he would be their sentinel, a guardian determined to ensure that, no matter how deep the darkness, the light of hope would always endure. The night's dark revelations had not faded with the sunrise. Instead, they loomed larger, like storm clouds gathering on an already turbulent horizon. In the sterile light of early morning, Mercer reviewed the latest influx of reports on his tablet, a mosaic of brief eyewitness accounts, inexplicable sensor readings, and grainy video clips capturing fleeting glimpses of symbols flickering on city walls. The ominous patterns were unmistakable, echoing the markings from the chapel and the mill. Every report added to the growing chorus of warnings. Something was stirring beneath the surface. At the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Colleagues spoke in subdued tones about unusual disturbances in areas long forgotten by the modern city. In a hastily arranged briefing, Mercer and Evelyn gathered their small, trusted team. The room, filled with maps and archival photographs, buzzed with a quiet urgency as they cross-referenced each new piece of evidence. The reclusive historian's earlier words haunted the discussion. Ancient pacts, sealed only temporarily, have a way of surging back when the conditions are right. Mercer's gaze moved over the images on the screen. Ghostly symbols painted on brick walls behind shuttered factories, eerie reflections captured in rain-slicked alleyways, and unexplained spikes in electromagnetic readings near disused warehouses. "They're not random," he said, his voice steady yet laced with concern. "This is coordinated, an undercurrent of occult activity that's spreading across the city. We need to determine if it's a precursor to a larger ritual." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in thought. "I've been looking at the celestial charts," she explained. "There's an alignment coming up in just a few nights, a convergence of planets that, according to the ancient texts, could create the perfect conditions for a major reactivation of the Covenant. If the cult intends to use this energy to open a portal or to harness an ancient force, it won't be a subtle affair." A heavy silence fell over the room as the gravity of her words sank in. Mercer felt that all his previous encounters had been mere preludes, a test of resolve, and a warning of what was to come. Now, with evidence mounting and the cosmic clock ticking, the threat was shifting from isolated incidents to the promise of a grand, orchestrated ritual. Determined to stay ahead, Mercer and Evelyn divided their tasks. One group was to monitor key locations around the city, sites that historical records identified as nexus points where the occult energies were strongest. Another team would delve into the old manuscripts and digital archives, searching for any reference to this new phase of activity. Meanwhile, Mercer himself planned a discreet visit to the abandoned mill one more time, driven by a need to understand the subtle shift in energy that had been detected there. That evening, as twilight began to settle over the city, Mercer returned to the mill alone. The structure, with its silent, brooding facade, seemed even more ominous under a bruised sky. The air around it vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible hum, an echo of the ancient chants that had once filled its corridors. Clutching his flashlight and a portable sensor, he stepped cautiously through the overgrown entrance. Inside, the mill was cloaked in a heavy, expectant silence. Mercer's flashlight revealed the faded remnants of the ritual symbols they had documented before. But tonight, there was an added intensity. The symbols appeared freshly touched by light, a subtle glow pulsing in time with the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He paused before one particularly intricate design, feeling its pull as if it were a living thing. A surge of static ran through his sensor, and on the digital readout, a spike in energy confirmed his growing suspicion. The Covenant's power was rising, and it was gathering strength in the hidden corners of the city. A sudden noise, a distant clatter of metal, and soft footsteps made Mercer freeze. He held his breath and peered into the darkness. For a long, tension-filled moment, nothing moved. Then, as if in response to his silent vigil, a whisper seemed to echo faintly through the cavernous hall, barely audible, yet unmistakably laden with meaning. The tide is rising. Mercer's resolve hardened. The message was a call to action, a reminder that the forces he had battled before were not vanquished, but were now evolving into something more formidable. He retraced his steps out of the mill, the chilling words reverberating in his mind, and drove back to the precinct to share his findings. In a debriefing later that night, under the dim glow of a single desk lamp, Mercer recounted the events at the mill to his team. The sensor readings, the glowing symbols, and that whispered warning all pointed to a singular conclusion. The Covenant's remnants were coalescing, preparing for a resurgence that could soon engulf the city in chaos. Evelyn's eyes shone with determination as she addressed the room. We have only a short window before the celestial alignment. Every moment counts. We must coordinate with our field teams and prepare to intercept any further ritual activities. Our goal is to prevent the full-scale activation of this new covenant. As the meeting adjourned and the team dispersed to their assignments, Mercer remained seated for a long moment, staring out of the window at the city lights. The rising tide of occult power was a silent, relentless force, one that mirrored the inner battles he had fought for so long. He knew that the coming days would test him in ways he could scarcely imagine. Yet, in the deepening silence of the night, amid the unseen energies and whispered warnings, he vowed to stand as the guardian against the encroaching darkness. The rising tide had begun, and with it, the battle for the soul of the city, a battle that would require every ounce of courage, every scrap of wisdom drawn from the past, and an unyielding commitment to protect the fragile boundary between light and shadow. As Mercer prepared for what lay ahead, the silent warning of that mill would remain etched in his memory, a promise that the struggle was far from over, and that destiny, once again, was calling him to the front lines of an ancient, ever-unfolding war. Night had fallen again, heavier and more portentous than before. The celestial charts that Evelyn had pored over during the briefing now glowed with an almost mystical intensity on her tablet. The alignment was imminent, a rare cosmic conjunction that promised to amplify the occult energies already gathering in the city. Every shadow in the dim corridors of the precinct, Every whispered rumor from the field teams confirmed one inexorable truth. The convergence had begun. Mercer stood by the window of the briefing room, watching the darkened city stretch beneath a canopy of unsettled clouds. In the distance, the glow of streetlights mixed with the muted radiance of a few stubborn stars, as if the heavens themselves were straining to be heard. His thoughts churned with memories of past encounters, those harrowing moments in the chapel, the desperate incantations, the whispered warnings, and he felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon him once more. Evelyn joined him quietly, her eyes reflecting both resolve and concern. "The alignment starts in just under 3 hours," she said softly, her voice measured as though she were reciting an incantation. "Our sensors at the industrial park near the docks have registered a steady rise in energy levels. We believe that's where the main ritual will take place." Mercer nodded, steeling himself. "Then we move before it peaks. We can't let them harness that power. If the ritual completes, if they open the portal, it could change everything." A low murmur rippled through the room as Mercer addressed the assembled field team. In hushed tones and determined glances, the team prepared their equipment: electromagnetic detectors, portable surveillance drones, and a small cache of defensive gear. The atmosphere was taut with anticipation, every member aware that the coming hours might well determine the fate of the city. Outside, the wind began to pick up, carrying a chill that foretold the arrival of the cosmic event. Mercer and Evelyn led the convoy to the abandoned industrial park, a sprawling complex of rusted warehouses and derelict loading docks, long forgotten by the modern city, but now reawakened by the stirrings of ancient power. The setting was cinematic in its decay. Massive corrugated metal structures loomed like relics of a lost era, and broken windows shuddered in the gusts as if whispering secrets of the past. As the team established a perimeter, Mercer slipped away with Evelyn to survey the most promising vantage point. From a crumbling, ivy-laced rooftop overlooking a desolate factory yard, they observed a curious sight. Faint, phosphorescent symbols, similar to those from the mill and the chapel, glowed on the walls of one of the larger warehouses. There, shrouded in darkness, a small group of figures in tattered robes gathered in a rough circle, their voices low and resonant, carried upward on the wind in a hypnotic chant that melded with the natural rumble of the approaching storm. Mercer's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold. In that moment, every experience he'd had over the past weeks, the spectral visitations, the whispered warnings on the phone, the surge of energy at the mill, coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. The cult was attempting to complete a ritual of unprecedented scale, and the celestial alignment would serve as their catalyst. "James," Evelyn murmured, her breath barely audible over the rising wind. "They're preparing something massive. I can feel it in the air, a charge that's more than just human fanaticism. It's as if the very fabric of reality is bending to their will." Mercer clenched his jaw. "We have to stop them before the alignment reaches its peak," he said, his voice low and resolute. "If they succeed, the portal will open, and we might not be able to close it again." Before they could relay their plan to the field teams, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the warehouse and the surrounding sky. For an agonizing heartbeat, the entire scene was bathed in an otherworldly brilliance. In that brief, frozen moment, Mercer felt as if time itself had stilled. The chanting, the wind, the pulsing of the symbols, all converged into a single point of destiny. Then the flash passed, and darkness reclaimed the night, even deeper and more foreboding than before. The cultists resumed their chant, now more fervent, as if emboldened by the celestial sign. Mercer's gaze shifted from the distant gathering to the sensor readings on his tablet. The numbers spiked sharply, confirming his worst fears. The energy was climbing rapidly, and the convergence was accelerating. "Field teams, move in on my mark," Mercer instructed into his radio, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. "We need to intercept this ritual before the celestial alignment peaks." In a flurry of organized chaos, the team mobilized. Mercer and Evelyn led the charge, their footsteps silent on the cracked pavement as they moved closer to the warehouse. Every moment was a battle against time and against forces unseen, a race to prevent the unlocking of a power that had been sealed away for centuries. At the threshold of the warehouse, Mercer paused, glancing at Evelyn. In her eyes, he saw unwavering determination, a promise that, together, they would stand against the rising tide of darkness. The distant chant grew louder, more insistent, as if the cultists sensed their intrusion. With a final, resolute breath, Mercer stepped forward into the gloom. The convergence was upon them, and as the celestial alignment began to unveil its eerie light, the battle between ancient forces and modern resolve was set to reach its zenith. In that charged moment, amid the thunder of the heavens and the murmurs of the hidden ritual, Mercer vowed that he would not let the rising tide of darkness drown the light of hope. The path ahead was treacherous, but he was ready to confront the abyss and to forge a future where the light would prevail over the shadows. Foreboding, but Mercer knew that his fight with the shadows was far from over. As the darkness loomed and the cosmic energies threatened to reshape their world, he steeled himself for whatever was to come next. The endgame was near, and Mercer would face it with every ounce of strength, courage, and resolve he could muster. For even as the night sky cracked open with unimaginable forces, he held steadfast to the belief that no matter how great the storm, light and truth could endure. A palpable tension charged the air as Mercer and his team surged into the warehouse. The convergence of celestial energy had reached its apex. The heavens themselves seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, and the once distant chants of the cultists now roared like a tidal wave of fervor. Inside, the warehouse was transformed into a battleground of light and shadow. Flickering candles and makeshift torches cast erratic, quivering patterns on walls scarred by centuries of neglect, while the cultists, arrayed in their ragged robes, formed a circle around a hastily constructed altar. At the very heart of the circle, the cult leader, a gaunt figure with eyes alight with fanatical zeal, stood before a central sigil that had begun to glow with an unearthly light. His voice, raised in a fervent incantation, competed with the howling wind and the distant rumble of thunder. In that charged moment, every sound, every flicker of flame, seemed to herald the unlocking of ancient power. "Hold your ground," Mercer commanded over his radio, his voice both calm and resolute. With Evelyn by his side, he led the advance, their silhouettes merging with the darkness as they closed in on the congregation. The team fanned out quietly, weapons and sensors at the ready, each member aware that tonight, the stakes transcended ordinary crime. A primordial force was at play. As Mercer stepped into the light of the central circle, the chanting faltered, replaced by a collective gasp. The cult leader's eyes locked onto him, and for a moment, the world seemed to slow. The leader's voice, tremulous with a mix of awe and malice, spat out a single word: Guardian. It was as if the prophecy had come alive in that frozen heartbeat, a destiny long denied and yet undeniably real. Mercer's hand moved instinctively to the pendant around his neck, a token from a past he had fought so hard to outrun. The pendant, warm and pulsing with a quiet inner light, was a link to those forgotten pages of lore that spoke of a guardian born of light and shadow, destined to either seal or unleash the portal. With the weight of destiny upon him, Mercer spoke the incantation he had painstakingly memorized, a counterspell woven from the very language of the ancient texts. The words tumbled from his lips, low and resonant, harmonizing with the murmurs of the cosmos. By the echoes of ages past, by the light that endures the night, I call upon the strength within and the grace of those who came before. I seal the rift. I break the chain. No darkness shall claim this realm again. At his declaration, a tumultuous energy erupted. The central sigil flared, casting a searing glow that splintered the darkness into 1,000 shimmering fragments. The cult leader roared in defiance, thrusting his arms toward the blazing symbol as if to harness its power. But the force unleashed by Mercer's voice was like a tidal surge, a sudden, overwhelming blast that sent shockwaves rippling through the gathered cultists. Their incantations dissolved into panicked cries as the energy recoiled, snapping the fragile link between their ritual and the ancient forces they sought to command. Evelyn's team moved with precise urgency, rounding up the disoriented cultists. In the ensuing chaos, the central sigil's light dimmed steadily, its power sapped by the steadfast will of the Guardian.
Outside, the celestial alignment shuddered as if disturbed by the force of their resistance, a final, defiant struggle against the pull of a darkness that had long sought release. For long, it seemed that time itself held its breath. Then, slowly,
the light of the sigil shrank, its glow fading into the mundane twilight of the industrial park. The oppressive hum that had filled the warehouse was replaced by a stunned silence, broken only by the distant echo of raindrops beginning to fall once more. Mercer stood, chest heaving with exertion and emotion, as the cult leader slumped to the ground, his eyes vacant, his voice silenced. Around him, the gathered acolytes began to disperse, their fervor extinguished by the undeniable force of mercy and resolve. The portal, whatever tenuous fissure had threatened to tear open the fabric of their world, was sealed, its dark promise deferred. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn stepped to Mercer's side. "You did it, James," she murmured, her tone a blend of relief and awe. "You turned back the tide." Mercer looked over the subdued faces of his team and the scattered remnants of the ritual. The storm overhead had subsided, leaving behind a sky streaked with the soft colors of early dawn. Yet within him, the battle was etched, a memory of every ounce of courage summoned, every fear confronted, and every sacrifice made in the name of preserving the fragile boundary between light and darkness. As the first cautious beams of morning light began to filter through the broken roof of the warehouse, Mercer allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. The convergence had been halted, the ancient covenant disrupted, and a new chapter in the struggle had begun. He knew that the darkness would always whisper its temptations, that the unseen forces would continue to seek a foothold in the modern world. But tonight, he had affirmed a timeless truth: the light of hope, bolstered by human resolve and the enduring strength of unity, could rise against even the most relentless night. Turning to Evelyn, Mercer offered a tired, sincere smile. "Let's get this evidence secured, and then we prepare for whatever comes next. This fight isn't over, but we're not giving in." Together, they stepped out of the warehouse into the cool embrace of the new day, their silhouettes merging with the light of dawn. The battle had been fierce, and the scars would remain. But in that quiet moment of victory, Mercer felt the promise of a future where, despite the rising tides of darkness, the enduring flame of hope would never be extinguished. In the early hours of the new day, as the remnants of rain shivered along cracked pavement and the last vestiges of darkness melted in a soft dawn, Mercer stood alone outside the warehouse. The air was crisp, a fragile interlude between night's despair and the tentative promise of morning. Though victory had been claimed, every fiber of his being still vibrated with the memory of the struggle. He recalled the roar of defiant incantations, the surge of ancient energy, and the solemn oath he'd made in the heart of that storm. Yet even now, as light bathed the industrial park in gentle hues, he sensed that the battle was far from over. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was subdued, yet electric with quiet determination. The evidence gathered from the warehouse, charred remnants of ritual symbols, recordings of desperate chants, and the lingering residue of supernatural energy, was being meticulously cataloged. In the cramped conference room, Mercer and Evelyn pored over every scrap of data, their voices a low murmur that mixed with the soft rustle of papers and the steady hum of fluorescent lights. "We've secured physical evidence," Evelyn said, her tone both hopeful and cautious as she swiped through images on her tablet. But there's something else. These readings, they're not returning to baseline. It's as if the energy from the ritual is seeping into the city, altering the fabric of our reality in ways we don't fully understand. Mercer nodded, his gaze drifting to the window where the city was beginning to stir. It's like the darkness left an imprint, a scar that will remind us it was here. I've seen it before in old legends, that once the breach has been sealed, its residue lingers, a constant reminder of what almost was. Across town, in a forgotten corner of the city, subtle disturbances had already begun to ripple through the night. In narrow alleyways, streetlights flickered with strange patterns, and in abandoned buildings, symbols eerily similar to those at the chapel and mill glowed for a few fleeting seconds before vanishing into the shadows. These quiet portents were not enough to spark panic in the general populace, but they were a clarion call to Mercer and his team. The ancient covenant's remnants were alive, quietly biding their time. Later that morning, Mercer walked through the precinct's evidence room, his footsteps echoing softly on the tiled floor. He paused before a display case that held a preserved fragment of charred paper, the scorched remnants of a ritual manuscript. His mind drifted to the spectral whisper that had first set him on this path. "Welcome home, James." That voice, laden with both greeting and forewarning, now resonated as a reminder of the delicate balance he was sworn to protect. Mercer, a voice called gently. It was Evelyn, stepping up beside him with her own thoughtful expression. "I know you're feeling it, the weight of what happened last night, and what might still be unfolding." Her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that steadied him. "We've done what we can for now, but we have to remain vigilant. Every day, every moment, we must be prepared for when the past tries to reassert itself." He looked up at her, eyes reflecting both the sorrow of loss and the fierce glow of determination. "I know," he murmured. "The darkness never really goes away, does it? It just hides in the corners, waiting for another chance." His voice was quiet but resolute, carrying the burden of countless battles fought against unseen forces. Evelyn offered a slight smile. "Then we keep the light burning. We document every sign, every whisper of abnormality. We build our defenses, not just with evidence and law, but with knowledge, old texts, folklore, everything that might help us understand these forces." In the weeks that followed, Mercer led a renewed campaign to map the occult disturbances around the city. Field teams, armed with advanced sensors and guided by Evelyn's meticulous research, scoured forgotten neighborhoods, derelict factories, and hidden alleyways. They discovered that the residual energy from the disrupted ritual was not static. It pulsed in patterns, a rhythm that echoed ancient incantations. In one such location, a long-abandoned subway station, a wall was found etched with spiraling glyphs that shimmered under the glow of a portable ultraviolet light. In another, near a crumbling tenement, whispers of a chant were captured on a recorder, only to vanish into static moments later. With every discovery, Mercer's conviction grew. His role as guardian was not a momentary flash of destiny. It was a lifelong duty to ensure that the fragile boundary between light and shadow remained intact. The battles he had fought were chapters in an ongoing saga, one in which every victory was tempered by the knowledge that darkness always lurked, waiting for its chance to surge anew. One cool evening, as dusk painted the city in deep blues and grays, Mercer returned to the precinct's rooftop for a moment of solitude. Standing at the edge, he looked out over the sleeping city, its skyline punctuated by the steady pulse of neon and the quiet murmur of urban life. The stars above were beginning to reveal themselves, small beacons in the vast expanse of night, reminiscent of the ancient light that had guided him in his darkest hours. In that reflective silence, Mercer allowed himself a small, determined smile. He knew the coming days would test him further. He knew that the echoes of the Covenant, its warnings, its remnants, would continue to ripple through the city, challenging him and those who believed in the power of light over darkness. But he also knew that hope was not a fragile flame easily snuffed out. It was a resilient beacon, kindled by every act of courage, every choice to stand against the night. Turning away from the cityscape, Mercer walked back inside, where Evelyn was waiting. Together, they reviewed the latest findings and prepared for another round of vigilant watch. Their work was far from over, and the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. Yet, in the interplay of hope and shadows, Mercer felt the steady, enduring truth. As long as there were those willing to defend the light, the darkness would never fully prevail. And so, in that quiet moment of shared resolve, Mercer embraced the silent warning that had sparked his renewed vigilance. The Covenant's remnants might echo through the streets, but the Guardian's duty was eternal, a promise that no matter how deep the shadows, the light of hope would always rise again. The journey was far from done. Every step, every clue, and every whisper brought him closer to the truth behind the echoes of the Covenant. The mysteries of the past would continue to stir, but Mercer knew this. He would be ready. Together with his team, with Evelyn by his side, he would face whatever came next. The fight between dark and light raged on, and Mercer, as the reluctant guardian of a fractured world, would walk its precarious line, determined to keep the shadows at bay. The city had barely awakened to another day when an unsettling chill crept into Mercer's routine. Though the aftermath of the warehouse battle and the careful monitoring that followed had provided a temporary sense of calm, a subtle disturbance in the fabric of the ordinary hinted at further turbulence. Early that morning, as Mercer was reviewing the latest field reports with Evelyn, a cryptic alert came through on the precinct's emergency channel. The message was terse and enigmatic. At the old harbor, a signal in the fog. Omen rising. The harbor, long a place of forgotten cargo, abandoned warehouses, and whispered maritime lore, had always been steeped in a sense of mystery. Now, its mention set Mercer's instincts on high alert. Without delay, Mercer and Evelyn assembled a small response team and set out for the harbor. The drive was silent, punctuated only by the distant hum of urban life and the rhythmic pulse of raindrops that had begun again in the pre-dawn gloom. As they neared the docks, the landscape transformed into a monochrome tableau. Fog clung to rusted cranes and skeletal ships, and the air was heavy with the scent of brine and decay. On arrival, the team dispersed cautiously, their flashlights cutting slender paths through the dense mist. Mercer led the way along a narrow pier, where peeling planks and rusted metal formed an eerie runway into the unknown. His senses were sharpened, every sound and shadow drawing his attention. Then, in the midst of the fog, he caught sight of something out of place, a faint glow pulsing rhythmically from the water's edge near a decrepit warehouse. As Mercer approached, the glow coalesced into a series of symbols, familiar, yet distorted by the watery reflections and the shifting haze. They were etched into the concrete platform, swirling in patterns that echoed the ancient glyphs he had seen at the chapel, mill, and warehouse. The pulsing light was soft and otherworldly, as if it were the beating heart of a dormant power awakening once more. Evelyn joined him, her voice hushed with urgency. "James, these symbols, they're active again. Look at the way they pulse. It's like they're trying to communicate." Mercer knelt beside the markings, running a gloved finger over the damp surface. A surge of energy, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable, coursed through him. In that moment, the memory of every encounter, the spectral voices, the incantations, the battles fought to seal the breach, flooded back. He felt the weight of his duty as guardian intensify, a reminder that the darkness was adaptive and persistent. Pulling out his portable sensor, Mercer observed a rapid spike in electromagnetic activity, far exceeding the baseline of any residual energy they'd measured before. "This isn't a mere echo," he murmured. "It's something new in Omen. Whoever or whatever is behind this isn't content with remnants. They're trying to send a message." As the team regrouped, distant voices, hushed, almost imperceptible, drifted on the foggy wind. The sound was layered and melancholic, like the whispers of long-departed sailors or the lament of lost souls. Mercer's gut told him that these voices were not random, but part of an incantation, a foretelling of events yet to unfold. Evelyn adjusted the sensor and studied the readings on her tablet. "There's a pattern here," she said slowly. "The energy fluctuates in time with these whispers. It's as if the symbols are resonating with a frequency meant to awaken something, a beacon calling out to forces beyond our understanding." Mercer's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the desolate scene. He knew that the old harbor had long been a haven for those who trafficked in secrets, a place where the boundary between land and sea, and between reality and myth blurred. Now, the pulsing omen seemed to be a harbinger of a new chapter in the endless struggle between light and shadow. Determined to capture as much data as possible, Mercer ordered the team to set up additional sensors around the perimeter while he and Evelyn documented the symbols and recorded the ghostly audio. Every moment in that spectral harbor was laden with portent, a subtle sign that the ancient covenant was stirring once more, perhaps evolving into a new form, one that could reshape the balance they had fought so hard to maintain. Standing in the cold, damp light of dawn, Mercer felt a familiar resolve settle over him. The new omen was both a warning and a call to action. It was clear that the forces aligned against him were persistent, ever adapting, and that his duty as guardian was far from over. With Evelyn at his side and the weight of centuries of occult legacy pressing upon his shoulders, he vowed silently that he would not allow the darkness to regain its lost dominion over the city. As the fog began to lift, revealing the stark outlines of the harbor against the pale sky, Mercer took a deep breath and stared at the pulsing symbols. They were a stark reminder that the battle was not won by a single victory, but was an ongoing war, a convergence of ancient secrets and modern resolve. And with each new omen, with every whispered message from the shadows, he knew he must remain ever vigilant, ever ready to rise against the rising tide. In that quiet, somber moment, as the harbor slowly awakened under the soft glow of early morning, Mercer understood that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Yet he also recognized that hope, like light piercing through the densest fog, would always be his guide. The battle for the soul of the city was far from over, and as the new omen pulsed steadily beneath his fingertips, Mercer resolved to continue his eternal stand against the encroaching dark, one vigilant heartbeat at a time. Night had fallen once again, and the harbor lay shrouded in an almost tangible mist that whispered of secrets best left undisturbed. The ominous glow of the earlier omen still pulsed faintly on the wet concrete of the pier, a steady beacon calling out into the darkness. Mercer, with his senses honed by weeks of relentless vigilance, stood at the edge of that pier. His eyes, dark and steady, traced the swirling glyphs now partly obscured by shifting fog. Every beat of his heart echoed the silent warning. The forces that had once been held at bay were gathering momentum. Beside him, Evelyn adjusted a set of portable sensors, her nimble fingers dancing over the controls as she monitored the energy fluctuations. "James," she murmured, her voice low but edged with urgency. "The readings are off the charts. It's like the energy is building up faster than we anticipated." Mercer nodded, his gaze never leaving the pulsing symbols. It's as if the Covenant's residue has found a new life here, an amplifier for whatever they're trying to summon. He paused, feeling the wind pick up, carrying with it the distant sound of crashing waves and the mournful wail of the sea. "The storm isn't just coming from the weather," he added, almost to himself. "It's here in the energy itself." The sensors confirmed his intuition. A rapid spike in electromagnetic activity vibrated through the harbor, and the static of the air carried an almost musical, foreboding cadence. As if in response to this surge, the fog began to churn and swirl in unnatural patterns, forming fleeting shapes that danced at the edges of vision. Mercer's mind flashed with memories of past confrontations, spectral voices, ancient incantations, and the weight of his destiny as the reluctant guardian of light against overwhelming darkness. Evelyn's eyes widened as she reviewed the latest data. "James, you need to see this," she said, drawing his attention to the tablet. "There, Amid the numerical chaos, a live feed from one of their surveillance drones showed something startling: a massive, ghostly vortex rising from the harbor's edge. It spun slowly at first, a dark, roiling mass with tendrils of luminescence reaching toward the sky, before pulsing outward like the beating of a giant, otherworldly heart. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The vortex seemed to pull in the very mist around it, drawing the scattered light into its churning center. Mercer's hand tightened around the railing as he took in the spectacle. "This is no natural storm," he said in a hushed tone. "They're orchestrating something on a scale we haven't seen before." At that moment, the wind intensified and the murmur of voices, disembodied and echoing, seemed to ride the gusts. The sound was layered, as if multiple whispers converged into a single, haunting message: the tide is rising. The breach is near. The words reverberated in Mercer's mind, stoking the deep well of resolve he had fought so hard to kindle. Determined not to let the gathering darkness overwhelm the fragile light of hope, Mercer and Evelyn quickly coordinated with the rest of their team. Radios crackled with urgent dispatches. Additional field units were en route to secure the perimeter, while technical experts from the precinct monitored the abnormal energy surges. Mercer, however, knew that this moment demanded more than mere technology. It required a human stand against forces that had slumbered for eons. Clad in a dark, weathered jacket and armed with a combination of modern gear and ancient counter-incantations memorized from dog-eared manuscripts, Mercer advanced cautiously toward the epicenter of the disturbance. Evelyn followed closely, her steady presence a source of strength in the face of mounting chaos. Their footsteps were muffled on the rain-soaked planks of the pier as they approached the swirling vortex, which now cast a shifting, eerie glow upon their determined faces. From behind them, a field operative's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, maintain positions. We're detecting further cultist activity near the old warehouse by the docks. They're mobilizing, possibly to complete a final phase of the ritual." Mercer's grip tightened. The cult's remnants were not content with quiet, clandestine signs. They were making a bold, visible move, one that threatened to tear the boundary between worlds open. As Mercer drew nearer to the vortex, the energy in the air became almost oppressive. The ambient temperature dropped sharply, and his breath emerged in quick, visible puffs. The swirling mass of darkness pulsed rhythmically, each beat seeming to synchronize with the pounding of his heart. In a moment of stark clarity, Mercer felt as if the force before him was not merely an external phenomenon, but a reflection of the inner turmoil he had battled for so long. Here, at the cusp of an ancient power reawakened, his fears and his hope converged. He stopped at the edge of the chaos, peering into the vortex. Through the roiling darkness, he could make out faint, spectral shapes, faces contorted in anguish and determination, reaching out as if to reclaim what had been lost. The voices grew louder, merging into a single, resonant chant that vibrated deep within his bones. It was the sound of countless souls, a mournful chorus that both beckoned and warned. In that critical moment, Mercer realized that the storm was not just an omen. It was the harbinger of a reckoning. The cult's aim was clear: to use the cosmic alignment to tear open the veil, to unleash a tide of darkness that would engulf the city and perhaps the world. But Mercer also knew that he was not without power. Every step he had taken on this long, arduous journey had prepared him for this confrontation. Drawing on a deep reservoir of resolve, Mercer recalled the incantation that had once helped him quell the forces in the warehouse. With a steady voice that resonated with both authority and compassion, he began to recite the ancient words once more. By the enduring light of those who came before, by the strength of the human spirit, I stand against the tide of darkness. I call upon the guardians of the old and the new. Let the light guide us and bind the shadows. As his words filled the cold night air, the vortex responded. Its chaotic rhythm slowed, and the spectral shapes within seemed to hesitate, as though caught in the grip of an unseen force. The energy readings on Evelyn's tablet began to stabilize, showing a subtle shift, a promise that the breach, though dangerously close, might yet be held at bay. In that charged, heart-stopping moment, the harbor itself became a battleground for destiny. The elements, wind, water, and ancient energy, swirled in a tumultuous dance, and Mercer felt the weight of countless generations in his outstretched hands. He was the guardian, the reluctant sentinel standing between the rising tide and the abyss. Slowly, as if recognizing the steadfast defiance emanating from Mercer's recitation, the vortex's furious pulsations began to recede. The tendrils of supernatural energy that had threatened to lash out and consume all around them seemed to lose their grip, holding back into the dark heart of the phenomenon. The ominous chant of the voices diminished, replaced by a haunting silence that spoke of a temporary, hard-won victory. Evelyn's voice came softly over the radio, laced with relief and cautious optimism. Mercer, the readings are dropping. The immediate surge is receding, but we still have a lot of work to do. Mercer exhaled slowly, his body still trembling from the surge of raw power and the confrontation with forces beyond the ordinary. "I know," he replied, his voice a mix of fatigue and resolve. "This storm is far from over. It's a warning, a call to prepare for what might come next." As the first faint glimmers of dawn began to edge away the remnants of night, Mercer and Evelyn gathered their team. They knew that while the immediate threat at the harbor had been subdued, the cosmic alignment was still active, and the cult's ambitions were not yet extinguished. The rising storm of destiny had been thwarted for now, but its echoes would reverberate through the coming days. Standing on the pier as the fog slowly lifted, Mercer looked out over the dark waters and the awakening city. In that moment, he understood that the struggle against ancient, relentless darkness was a perpetual battle, one that demanded vigilance, courage, and a commitment to protect the light, no matter how faint it might seem. With Evelyn by his side and the determined faces of his team in his mind, Mercer vowed that he would continue to stand guard against the rising tide, ready to confront the shadows with every ounce of his being. The night had given way to a new day, and though the storm of destiny still loomed on the horizon, hope flickered like a beacon in the darkness. And as Mercer stepped away from the harbor, leaving behind the ghostly echoes of that ominous omen, he carried with him the unyielding belief that as long as he and those who believed in the light remained, the darkness would never prevail. The days that followed the tempest at the harbor were filled with a tense stillness, a calm that was as deceptive as it was fragile. Mercer's every waking moment was devoted to vigilance, his eyes ever watchful for the slightest ripple in the fabric of the ordinary. Though the immediate storm had receded, the residual energy from the disrupted rituals clung to the city like a secret scar, a reminder that darkness never truly fades. At the precinct, Mercer's office had transformed into a hub of ceaseless activity. Evelyn and the research team worked late into the night, poring over sensor data, historical texts, and cryptic messages intercepted on emergency channels. Every anomaly, no matter how small, was scrutinized, cataloged, and analyzed. Reports from field teams continued to trickle in, unusual readings near abandoned factories, whispered incantations captured on audio devices, and fleeting images of ghostly symbols painted on crumbling walls. It was as if the city itself was murmuring warnings in a language older than time. Late one night, as rain pattered softly against the window and the glow of computer screens bathed the room in blue light, Mercer found a new message on his secure line. The text was simple, yet its implications sent a shiver down his spine. The vigil remains unbroken. The night is never truly over. He stared at the message for several long moments, absorbing its weight. Was it the work of a rogue cult cell, a sympathetic ally, or perhaps an echo of the ancient powers that had once been kept at bay? Mercer couldn't be sure, but he knew one thing. The battle was not over, and the Guardian's duty was eternal. Determined to maintain the upper hand, Mercer organized a nocturnal patrol along some of the city's most vulnerable sites. In a convoy of unmarked vehicles, his team fanned out over deserted industrial zones and forgotten alleyways. Each checkpoint was meticulously monitored, every sensor calibrated to detect even the faintest fluctuation in energy. Mercer himself led a small unit through a labyrinth of narrow streets that twisted between derelict buildings, their facades scarred by time and neglect. As midnight approached, reports began to arrive in rapid succession. A cold shiver felt near a crumbling tenement. A series of indecipherable symbols illuminated momentarily on a graffiti-covered wall, and the unmistakable echo of distant chanting carried on a humid breeze. At one such location, a deserted public square, its stone pavement wet and glistening under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, Mercer's team discovered fresh markings. They were crude, yet their intent was unmistakable. An inscription, hastily scrawled in a language that blended ancient symbols with modern graffiti. The inscription read, "Return the light. Let not the shadow reign." Mercer knelt beside the markings, running his gloved fingers over the damp concrete. It was a challenge, a plea, and perhaps even a threat all at once. In that moment, he felt the full gravity of his role, a role that extended beyond enforcing the law. He was the custodian of hope in a world that teetered on the edge of an abyss. Every sign, every whisper in the night, reinforced his resolve to remain ever vigilant. Back at the precinct, Evelyn gathered the latest data and organized a briefing for the early morning. With careful precision, she presented the new evidence, a timeline of disturbances, a map peppered with anomalous readings, and the chilling inscription that had appeared in the square. The room fell silent as Mercer spoke, his voice steady but heavy with determination. "We have fought back the darkness before," he said, his eyes scanning the assembled faces of his team. "But it's clear that the forces at work are adaptive. They leave behind remnants and messages, a constant reminder that the night never ends as long as we allow fear to take root. Our duty is to keep the vigil unbroken, to stand as a beacon even when the shadows stretch long." His words resonated deeply. There was an unspoken understanding among the team that their battle was not confined to a single confrontation or a solitary victory. It was an ongoing struggle against a tide that could rise at any moment. Each new omen, each whispered warning in the dark, was both a test and a call to action. As dawn began to break over the city, Mercer stepped out onto the rooftop of the precinct, a familiar place of quiet reflection. The city below was just beginning to stir, its skyline outlined against the soft blush of early morning light. In that serene moment, he allowed himself a brief smile, a recognition that while the fight against the encroaching darkness was far from over, hope remained an indomitable force. The vigil would continue, night after night, a perpetual promise to those who believed that light could always prevail over shadow. And as Mercer watched the horizon, he knew that he and his team would stand ready, unbowed, unbroken, and resolute in the eternal dance between light and darkness. As the new day broke over the city, a subtle transformation unfolded beneath the familiar skyline. The dark echoes of night slowly yielded to the first blush of dawn, a fragile promise of renewal that mingled with the lingering weight of past battles. Mercer stood once again on the precinct's rooftop, gazing out as the sun's early rays chased away the lingering fog. In that quiet moment, the scars etched by endless nights of vigilance began to soften into a muted tapestry of hope and determination. Inside the precinct, a renewed energy permeated the air. Evelyn had spent the early hours gathering every last piece of evidence, combing through field reports and sensor logs to detect any new anomalies that might signal further disturbances. The recent inscription, "Return the light, let not the shadow reign," had sparked a flurry of activity among her team, and now a series of fresh alerts were pouring in from areas previously thought dormant. These signs, though faint, hinted at a resurgence of the occult energy, a delicate interplay between remnants of the ancient covenant and an emerging force that sought to reshape the balance once more. During the morning briefing, Mercer addressed his team with a calm yet resolute tone. "Our watch never ends," he said, his voice steady as he scanned the room of weary yet determined faces. "The darkness has left its mark on this city, but every mark is also a sign, a call for us to learn, to adapt, and to reinforce our defenses. Today, we follow the trail. We decode every symbol, every whisper, so that we may not be caught off guard again." Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes alight with a mixture of urgency and optimism. "We've discovered new readings coming from the old Market District, a place where, despite modern renovations, the echoes of history still murmur from ancient brickwork. Our sensors picked up a series of rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat, emanating from beneath one of the renovated warehouses. I believe we're on the verge of uncovering another link in this dark chain." Mercer nodded thoughtfully. The Market District, with its blend of modern bustle and time-worn corners, had always been a crossroads of human endeavor, a fitting stage for the clandestine energies at work. "Let's move out," he ordered. "I want teams positioned there immediately, and keep all channels open. We must be prepared for any eventuality." Later that morning, Mercer and Evelyn drove through the city's labyrinthine streets toward the Market District. The urban sprawl, bathed in the gentle light of mid-morning, now revealed hidden angles and shadowed crevices that had long been overlooked. Arriving at the designated warehouse, they discovered that beneath its polished exterior, an old foundation of rough stone remained exposed, a relic of a bygone era. Scattered across that stone were symbols eerily similar to those seen at the harbor and the mill, but this time interlaced with new designs, as if attempting to rewrite an age-old incantation. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she photographed the carvings. "It's like a message," she whispered, "a plea for renewal, or perhaps a warning that the darkness is evolving." Mercer crouched beside her, studying the intricate patterns with the careful scrutiny of one who has spent a lifetime deciphering secrets. "Every inscription tells a story," he murmured. "We must learn its language if we are to keep our city safe." As the day advanced, more evidence emerged. A discarded scrap of fabric inscribed with cryptic verses, faint echoes of chanting caught on a stray audio recorder, and even an unaccounted-for surge in electromagnetic activity near a forgotten courtyard. Each discovery reinforced the reality that the ancient energies were not static relics of the past, but dynamic forces continually reshaping their influence in the modern world. In a quiet moment away from the relentless pace of field operations, Mercer retreated to his office to reflect on all that had transpired. The memories of spectral voices, raging vortices, and desperate incantations intertwined with his own hopes and regrets. He realized that his lifelong vigil was not merely a burden, but also a sacred duty, a commitment to illuminate the dark corners of the world with the steady light of human resolve. With a determined heart and the unwavering support of his team and Evelyn, Mercer resolved to confront whatever new challenges lay ahead. The breaking dawn had not only banished the immediate shadows of night, but had also heralded a new chapter in their enduring struggle, a chapter defined by resilience, insight, and the relentless pursuit of hope. As he stepped back onto the rooftop that evening, watching the city transform under the glow of a settling sun, Mercer knew that while the darkness would always whisper its secrets, the light of vigilance and courage would forever stand as its antithesis. And so, with the promise of a new beginning etched in the rising dawn, he prepared to continue the unbroken vigil, a guardian of hope amid the ever-shifting interplay of shadows and light. Broken fight against the shadows with renewed conviction. For as long as the darkness persisted in the unseen corners of the world, Mercer and his team would remain the silent sentinels, ever watchful, ever prepared. The victory at the warehouse and the evidence gathered over the past weeks had not quieted the undercurrent of unease in Mercer's heart. Even as the city basked in the tentative glow of renewed daylight, whispers of unsettled energies persisted. It was in those quiet moments, when the urban hum softened and the past merged with the present, that Mercer sensed the true nature of his burden, the eternal vigilance against forces that never truly slept. Late one afternoon, As the sun dipped behind the jagged skyline and shadows stretched long over the city's ancient districts, Mercer found himself drawn once again to the precinct's rooftop. The view offered a panoramic reminder of all that lay beneath. Streets bustling with life interwoven with forgotten alleys and hidden relics of another era. He stood there, lost in thought, when a soft chime on his secure device broke his reverie. The new message was terse, almost poetic in its brevity. Beyond the horizon, the past calls anew. Prepare for the next rising. A chill raced through him. Not the familiar shiver of impending confrontation, but the quiet realization that the battle was shifting into a new phase. Mercer knew all too well that the forces he fought against were not content with mere residue. They evolved, taking on forms both subtle and monstrous as they sought to rewrite the balance of light and shadow. He immediately convened a meeting with Evelyn and the research team. In the cramped conference room, papers rustled and screens glowed softly as they gathered to parse the implications of this latest alert. Evelyn's brow furrowed as she correlated the message with recent sensor data and newly surfaced historical records. There's a pattern emerging, she explained. The old market district and the harbor weren't isolated anomalies. They were part of a network. And now, our readings from the northern quarter near the old cathedral ruins show an unmistakable surge in occult activity. Mercer listened intently, his mind mapping the city's hidden ley lines as if they were battle plans. The northern quarter, with its labyrinthine alleys and centuries-old stone, had always whispered secrets of a bygone era. It's almost as if the city itself is awakening to a call from the past, he mused. Our guardianship is not just about containing energy, it's about understanding its evolution. That evening, under a sky smeared with indigo and violet, Mercer, Evelyn, and a small, elite field unit drove to the cathedral ruins. The structure, half collapsed and overgrown with ivy, stood like a mausoleum of memory amid modern detritus. As they parked near the crumbling facade, the atmosphere was heavy with both history and an unsettling anticipation. Moving cautiously through narrow, echoing corridors, the team found themselves in a vast, open courtyard where the remnants of ornate stone carvings still clung to the walls. Here, subtle glyphs had been freshly inscribed, glowing faintly in phosphorescent greens and blues. Mercer's heart pounded as he knelt to examine the markings. They were similar to those found at the harbor and warehouse, but here they were arranged in a spiral pattern that pulsed rhythmically, as if alive. Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. It looks like they're trying to establish a new focal point for the ritual. The pattern suggests a portal, a gateway that's meant to harness the energy of this entire network. Mercer's gaze swept over the ruin, taking in the interplay of decay and strange new order. This is the next horizon, he murmured, a threshold they're trying to cross. If they succeed, the energy will no longer be a scattered remnant. It will become a force, an entity that could reshape everything. As dusk settled, the team established a discreet observation post on a higher ledge overlooking the courtyard. Mercer positioned himself at the edge, his eyes straining against the encroaching darkness. The fresh symbols began to shimmer as the last light faded, and an eerie silence fell, punctuated only by the distant sound of a low, continuous hum, like a heartbeat echoing in the void. For long minutes, Mercer remained transfixed, the weight of centuries pressing upon his soul. He recalled every whispered warning, every confrontation with the supernatural that had led him to this moment. And then, as if summoned by his own unyielding resolve, he spoke softly into the quiet night. We stand here as the inheritors of light. I will not let the darkness prevail, not while I have breath. His words were carried away by the wind, mingling with the murmurs of ancient stone and the subtle pulse of the new glyphs. In that profound silence, Mercer felt a connection to every guardian who had come before him, a lineage of souls who had fought the relentless advance of shadow. Now, faced with the promise of a new awakening, he knew that the struggle was far from over. Instead, It had evolved into something more complex, more entwined with the very fabric of existence. Returning to the observation post, Mercer's resolve crystallized. The message had been clear. The past was calling, and the darkness was mobilizing. But so long as he and those who believed in the light remained steadfast, there was hope. With a steady gaze, he transmitted a brief report to the precinct. New activity confirmed at the cathedral ruins. Prepare for strategic engagement. The next horizon is upon us. As night deepened, Mercer and his team maintained their vigil. The ancient energies pulsed steadily, and the whispered incantations of unseen voices filled the air with a spectral promise of what might come. Amid the rising storm of uncertainty, Mercer's heart beat with a fierce determination, a promise that he would stand as the unbroken sentinel at the boundary between light and shadow. The next horizon beckoned, shrouded in mystery and steeped in the echoes of a forgotten past. And as Mercer prepared to face whatever new challenges the darkness would unveil, he knew one immutable truth: the Guardian's duty was eternal. In the interplay of ancient power and modern courage, hope would always rise anew, one vigilant heartbeat at a time. Light and shadow, the fight for the soul of the city, and perhaps the world would never cease. As midnight deepened, the ancient cathedral ruins transformed into an arena of spectral intensity. Mercer and his elite team, still huddled on the ledge overlooking the courtyard, watched with bated breath as the newly inscribed glyphs on the ruined walls began to pulse with an inner light more vivid than before. The symbols, arranged in an ever-tightening spiral, radiated energy that seemed to warp the very air, a luminous veil that blurred the boundary between this world and the next. From the depths of that eerie glow emerged a slow, deliberate murmur, a low chant that resonated from unseen mouths within the ruins' decaying arches. It was as if the stone itself had awakened, beckoning forth memories of rituals long lost to time. Mercer's heart pounded, with a mix of dread and defiant resolve as he realized that the energy had reached a critical mass. Whatever force had been gathering here was on the cusp of transcending its dormant state and manifesting in a form that could challenge the delicate balance they had fought so hard to maintain. Evelyn's voice, steady despite the rising tension, crackled softly over their covert comlink. "James, I'm reading an anomalous spike in the energy signature. It's unlike anything we've seen. This is not just a message. It feels like an invocation." Her tone was edged with both awe and concern, a reminder that the forces they had been tracking were evolving beyond simple symbols. Mercer adjusted his stance on the ledge, eyes fixed on the shifting veil of light. "The veil is rising," he murmured, as if speaking the truth aloud might summon either salvation or further chaos. "And with it, the boundaries between our realm and theirs are thinning. We need to be ready for anything." The words carried the weight of an ancient oath, a promise to stand firm, even as the supernatural brushed against the fabric of everyday life. Suddenly, a new figure appeared within the pulsating light, a tall, indistinct silhouette that moved with an unnatural grace. The form was draped in tattered robes that caught the glow, and its face was obscured by a deep hood. The apparition seemed to float toward the central spiral of glyphs, its movements deliberate and imbued with purpose. As it approached, the spectral chanting swelled, filling the courtyard with a sound that was both mournful and commanding. Mercer's instincts roared to life. "Team, prepare for contact," he ordered in a hushed, urgent tone over the radio. The field unit on the ground acknowledged with measured responses, and within moments, subtle figures, shadowy outlines of Mercer's teammates, began to spread out around the ruins, securing the perimeter without alerting the emerging force. The hooded figure paused just before the glowing spiral. For several heartbeats, time seemed to suspend itself as the figure's unseen eyes bore into the depths of the ritual's light. Then, in a voice that echoed both in the ears and the soul, it spoke. "I am the keeper of the veil, guardian of thresholds between worlds. You who dare to resist the inevitable must know. Darkness and light are entwined, an eternal dance that shapes destiny. Who are you to challenge what has been ordained by time? Mercer stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. I am James Mercer, guardian of this city's hope. I stand for those who refuse to let ancient shadows enslave our future. We do not seek to command destiny. We only defend the light that sustains it. His words, firm and unyielding, reverberated across the silent courtyard and seemed to hang in the charged air between them. The keeper's silhouette wavered, as if the words struck a chord deep within its spectral core. The pulsating glow of the glyphs began to flicker, and the eerie chant shifted into a soft, almost sorrowful tone. For a moment, an unspoken understanding passed between Mercer and the mysterious figure, a recognition that both were bound by the same ancient forces, though destined for opposing paths. Then the figure slowly raised a hand, and in response, the radiant spiral intensified, casting dancing shadows on every broken surface of the ruins. If you wish to defy the rising tide, you must prove that your light can endure the merging of worlds, the keeper intoned. Show that the promise of hope can overcome the abyss that seeks to claim us all. Mercer's gaze hardened, the determination in his eyes reflecting both the scars of past battles and the unwavering resolve of a guardian who had weathered countless storms. We will stand against the darkness, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of conviction and the strength of generations. We will ensure that the light of hope remains unbroken, no matter how the veil may rise. A long, tense silence fell as the figure considered his words. Then, with a subtle nod that seemed to acknowledge both challenge and respect, the keeper slowly receded into the shifting luminescence, leaving behind only the echo of its presence and a final, whispered promise. Then may your vigil light the path through the endless night. In that moment, the glowing veil began to dissipate gradually, its radiance softening until it was nothing more than a memory etched in the cool night air. Mercer exhaled slowly, the adrenaline and emotion of the encounter mingling with the quiet relief of a hard-fought stand. Evelyn's steady presence at his side reminded him that while this confrontation was but one chapter in an unending struggle, it was a victory, a reaffirmation that the eternal dance between light and shadow could be steered by those who dared to rise. As the first whispers of dawn crept over the horizon, Mercer and his team secured the area and began to gather the last traces of the night's events, photographs of the now fading symbols, audio recordings of the Keeper's cryptic message, and sensor logs that bore witness to the surge in energy. Each piece of evidence was a beacon in itself, a testament to the battles fought and a guidepost for the challenges yet to come. In the quiet aftermath, Mercer returned once more to the precinct's rooftop. The city below was still shrouded in the tender embrace of early morning, and the scars of night had softened into a muted promise of renewal. As he gazed out over the sleeping metropolis, he felt both the burden and the honor of his eternal duty. The rising veil had been challenged, and though the darkness would never be vanquished entirely, the light of vigilant hope shone ever brighter. With a resolute nod, Mercer whispered to the awakening sky, "Our vigil continues. For every shadow that falls, we will be the light that rises." And so, under the tender hues of breaking dawn, the unbroken vigil marched onward, guardians of a promise that, even in the depths of night, hope would forever endure. The night after the rising veil, Mercer's dreams were haunted by half-formed visions of endless corridors and distant, echoing voices, a disjointed tapestry of warnings and memories that defied easy explanation. Though the early dawn had brought a fragile calm, Mercer knew that beneath the surface of the city lay a restless force, waiting to surge once more. The encounter with the Keeper had been both a confrontation and a communion, a moment when ancient power and modern resolve met on an equal plane. Yet now, as the city slowly awakened to another day, a new undercurrent of disturbance pulsed just beneath the familiar hum of urban life. In the sterile light of his office, Mercer pored over the data gathered during the night. Sensor logs, Audio recordings and countless photographs of ephemeral glyphs had been meticulously cataloged by Evelyn and the research team. But one file in particular caught his attention, a grainy, almost abstract image captured on a surveillance drone near an old subway station in the industrial district. The image revealed a pattern of luminescent symbols glowing faintly on a damp concrete wall, arranged in a way that suggested a deliberate design, far more complex than any mere act of vandalism. It was as if an ancient script had been etched in secret, hidden in the labyrinthine underbelly of the city. Mercer's mind raced. The image was a new omen, a sign that the forces he had battled at the cathedral ruins and the harbor were coalescing elsewhere. He recalled the Keeper's challenge: show that the promise of hope can overcome the abyss that seeks to claim us all. Now, it seemed that abyss was stirring once more beneath the surface of the everyday. Evelyn joined him at his desk, her eyes fixed on the image. "This wasn't here before," she said softly. "Our patrol near the old subway line reported unusual electromagnetic fluctuations. The symbols here, they're distinct. They have an angular precision and a vibrancy that suggests they're part of an ongoing ritual. It might be the work of a new faction, or perhaps an offshoot of the original covenant." Mercer leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his stubbled chin. "It appears that the darkness we've been fighting isn't a single entity, it's a network. Every location we've monitored, every whisper of occult activity, ties together like threads in a tapestry. And somewhere in that tapestry, someone is weaving a new pattern, a new path to power." He paused, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. "We have to follow these threads, Evelyn. If we're to protect this city, we must venture into the uncharted abyss where the old and new converge." With determination etched in his features, Mercer assembled a small expedition. Along with Evelyn and a select group of trusted field operatives, he planned a covert visit to the decrepit subway station. The station lay abandoned for decades, a relic of the past left to be reclaimed by darkness and decay. Its corridors, now a maze of rusted tracks and shattered tiles, had long been a haven for urban legends and whispered secrets. Mercer suspected that beneath its crumbling arches, the pulsing energies of the ancient covenant might have found fertile ground. That night, under a slate sky pierced by sporadic stars, the team descended into the subterranean labyrinth. Armed with flashlights, electromagnetic sensors, and an assortment of carefully preserved counter-ritual texts, they navigated the narrow passageways with practiced caution. Every step echoed off cold, concrete walls, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and long-forgotten metal. As they advanced deeper, the sensor readings began to spike, a clear indication that the dormant energies of the abyss were stirring. They reached a cavernous platform where the remains of an old station awaited, its tiled walls marked by graffiti and the slow encroachment of nature. There, in the half-light of a flickering overhead lamp, Mercer's flashlight caught something extraordinary. A series of symbols, precisely arranged in a circular formation, painted in a substance that glowed with an eerie blue light. The script was unlike anything in the current records, a synthesis of archaic runes and modern geometric patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the distant rumble of the city above. "Here," Mercer whispered, kneeling beside the glowing inscription. He extended a gloved hand, and as his fingertips brushed the cool, luminescent surface, he felt a surge of energy, a tingling charge that raced through his nerves. In that moment, the murmuring of the station seemed to coalesce into a single, resonant note, as if the very structure were alive with anticipation. Evelyn knelt beside him, her voice hushed in awe. "This isn't random. It's as though someone deliberately activated this space. We need to record everything, every measurement, every image." Her fingers danced over her portable scanner, capturing the data with precision. "Mercer, these symbols, they're calling out almost like they're inviting contact." Mercer's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, or they could be a warning. He recalled the cryptic messages they'd received in recent weeks, whispers that the Covenant's remnants were evolving, that a new force was gathering. This could be the threshold where they plan to bridge the gap between our world and the abyss. And if that happens, if the ritual is completed, before he could finish, the temperature in the tunnel dropped precipitously. A low hum, almost imperceptible at first, began to vibrate through the floor. The symbols pulsed more rapidly, and the blue glow intensified until it bathed the platform in an otherworldly radiance. Ugh! Operatives exchanged uneasy glances as the hum grew louder, merging with the distant sound of choral voices, a sound that was neither fully human nor entirely spectral. Suddenly, a ripple of movement passed through the gloom. From the far end of the platform, a figure emerged, cloaked and hooded, its presence marked by a graceful, almost hypnotic motion. Mercer felt a chill run down his spine. Was this another emissary of the Old Covenant, or something entirely new? The figure stopped a few paces away, turning slowly so that its face remained hidden in shadow. In a voice that reverberated softly off the walls, it spoke. The path has been chosen. Those who seek to awaken the abyss must first be prepared to embrace its dark truth. The words, low and resonant, sent a shiver through the assembled team. Mercer stepped forward, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling around him. We are not here to awaken what you wish to control. We stand as guardians of this city, defenders of the light that endures. You may seek to open the door between worlds, but we will not let that darkness overrun our future. The hooded figure inclined its head slowly. Defiance is the flame that keeps hope alight. It intoned, and for a moment, its tone softened as if in reluctant admiration. Yet the abyss is eternal, and its call cannot be denied forever. The choice is yours, Guardian. Will you stand firm and repel the tide, or will you yield and let the darkness reclaim its dominion? For several long seconds, the only sound was the rhythmic pulse of the glowing glyphs and the low hum that filled the cavern. Mercer felt the weight of countless generations in that silent query. Every battle fought, every sacrifice made, had led to this uncharted moment. The abyss beckoned with promises of power, but Mercer knew that true strength lay in the resilience of hope. I choose to protect what is mine, Mercer declared firmly, his voice echoing through the empty station. I choose to hold the line between light and darkness, no matter the cost. His words were not merely a statement. They were a vow, a declaration of purpose that reverberated with the energy of every guardian who had ever stood before him. The figure regarded him silently, then slowly raised its hand in a gesture that appeared almost conciliatory. Then let it be so, it whispered. May your resolve be the beacon that guides the lost from the depths of the uncharted abyss. With that, the figure faded into the shadows, leaving behind only the lingering echo of its presence and the pulsing glow of the symbols. In the silence that followed, Mercer and his team remained motionless, absorbing the enormity of what had just transpired. Evelyn's hand found Mercer's, and together they stood in silent communion, a shared understanding that their struggle was far from over. The glowing inscription slowly dimmed, its energy retreating into the stone, but the mark it had left on their souls would remain indelible. As the operatives began to record every detail, Mercer made a final note in his journal, a quiet promise that this uncharted abyss would be met not with fear, but with unyielding vigilance. The night had once again delivered a message from the depths, a reminder that while the forces of darkness were ancient and relentless, so too was the light of hope, embodied in those who dared to stand against it. Rising from the cold, damp floor of the station, Mercer stepped into the darkness with renewed resolve. Beyond the glow of the ancient symbols lay a vast, unknown future, a future that would demand sacrifice, courage, and the unwavering commitment of every guardian of light. And as he led his team back to the surface, the echo of the hooded figure's parting words mingled with the first hints of dawn, heralding a new chapter in the eternal struggle between the light and the uncharted abyss.